He buried his heart the same day he buried his wife. For 3 years, Caleb Mercer spoke to no one, trusted no one, and wanted nothing. Then a woman walked into the dying light of the Texas horizon, alone, bleeding, carrying a secret that could get them both killed. He should have ridden past her. Every scar he owned told him to. But there was something in the way she refused to break that stopped him cold. This is not a love story, not at first. This is the story of two people with nothing left to lose, finding out they were wrong. Drop a comment with your city. Let's see how far this story travels. Hit like and follow along. You won't want to miss what's coming. The dust had been following Caleb Mercer for 3 days. Not the kind of dust that settles, the kind that clings to the crease of your collar, to the corners of your eyes, to the inside of your mouth, so that everything you taste for a week carries the flavor of dry earth and dead grass. West Texas in late September had a particular cruelty to it. The sun didn't just shine, it pressed down on a man like it had a personal grievance. The land stretched in every direction without apology. Cracked flats, bleached rock, the occasional ghost of a tree that had given up trying to look alive years ago. Caleb rode slow. Not because his horse, a dark-roan gelding named Belle, couldn't move faster. Belle was 15 years old and still had more bottom than most horses half her age. He rode slow because there wasn't anywhere he was going. Hadn't been for a while now. He had a bedroll, a canteen he filled whenever he found water, a rifle in the scabbard, a revolver on his hip, and a knife in his boot that he'd carried so long the handle had shaped itself to his grip. He had enough dried meat and hardtack to last another 4 days if he was careful, and he was always careful. Care was one of the few habits he hadn't been able to shake. He didn't have a destination, hadn't had one since Amarillo, and before that, Lubbock, and before that a place he didn't name anymore, even in his own thoughts. He'd been moving west and then south, and then west again in a way that wasn't really travel so much as refusal. Refusal to stop, refusal to settle, refusal to plant himself somewhere long enough for the past to find him and sit down beside him and stay. It was finding him anyway. That was the thing about grief nobody warned you of. It didn't chase, it just waited. He was thinking about nothing, which was the closest he got to peace anymore, when Belle's ears came forward. Caleb's hand dropped to the revolver before he'd finished the thought. He pulled up on the reins and sat still, reading the land the way a man learns to read it when he's spent enough time alone in dangerous country. Belle's nostrils flared. She shifted her weight, not spooked, just alert. She was pointing him west and slightly south, toward a shallow arroyo where a cluster of scraggly mesquite trees threw thin shadows across the dirt. He sat there for a full minute, listening. Wind, his own breathing, the faint creak of the saddle. Then, movement. A figure, walking, coming up out of the arroyo onto the flats, moving east. He watched. It was a woman. She was on foot, which out here in this heat, at this hour, the sun maybe 2 hours from the horizon, was not a small thing. She carried nothing he could see except what looked like a wrapped bundle pressed against her chest, held in both arms the way you'd carry something you weren't willing to set down under any circumstances. She wasn't running. She walked steady, deliberate, each step placed like it cost her something. Her dress, dark, practical, was torn at the hem. Her hair had come mostly loose from whatever had held it and moved in pieces around her face in the dry wind. She didn't look back. Whatever was behind her, she'd already decided not to look at again. Caleb watched her for another minute. Old habit. You didn't ride up on strangers in this country without taking your time first. Could be a decoy. Could be anything. She stumbled. Her right knee went down hard on the rock and gravel, and the thing she was carrying lurched forward. For one terrible second, her arms scrambled to hold it, and she did. She caught it, held it tight against herself, and knelt there in the dirt with her head bowed. From this distance, he couldn't hear anything, but he could see her shoulders moving, short, sharp movements, controlled breathing maybe, or trying to be. She didn't cry out, she didn't look around for help. She just stayed there for a moment, collected herself, and stood back up, and kept walking. Caleb let out a slow breath through his nose. He touched Belle's sides lightly with his heels. He came up on her from an angle, not directly behind. Coming at a person from behind in this country tended to get you shot, and he suspected this woman had something to shoot with even if he couldn't see it. He made enough noise that she heard him coming. She stopped, turned, Her face was something he wasn't prepared for. Not beautiful exactly, or not in any soft way. She was maybe 30, maybe a few years either side of it. Dark eyes, the kind that had seen enough to stop being surprised. A cut above her left cheekbone, dried blood tracking down toward her jaw. Jaw itself set like she'd wired it that way. She was breathing hard from the walking, but she held herself as still as she could manage, looking up at him with an expression that wasn't fear, wasn't relief, and wasn't anything as simple as defiance either. It was just readiness. She was ready for whatever he turned out to be. Her right hand, the one not holding the bundle, was tucked against her side, hidden in the fold of her torn skirt. "You got a weapon under there," Caleb said. It wasn't a question. "I do," she said. Her voice was level. "All right." He kept both hands visible on the saddle horn. "I'm not going to pretend that's not smart." She watched him. "What do you want?" "I don't want anything. Saw you fall." He glanced at her knee. The fabric was torn there too, dark with blood through the dust. "Thought I'd see if you needed water." Something moved in her face. Gone before he could name it. "I'm fine. You're bleeding through your knee and you've got maybe 8 miles to anything that looks like shelter, and it'll be dark in 2 hours. He reached back to his saddlebag without hurrying, pulled out the canteen and held it out. Not close. He held it at the end of his arm, enough distance that she could take it without having to get near him. Wasn't a judgment, just information. She looked at the canteen for a moment, then at him. "What's your name?" she asked. "Caleb Mercer." "You a lawman?" "No." "You working for anyone?" "No." She studied him with those dark, careful eyes. Then she reached out and took the canteen. She held the bundle against her chest with one arm, awkward, and drank with her other hand. Not greedy. Measured. A person accustomed to rationing things. She handed it back. "Thank you. Where are you headed?" "East." A pause. "Red Rock? If I can make it?" "On foot." "My horse ran." The words were flat. She didn't elaborate. Caleb looked out at the flats, then back at her. He hadn't planned to say the next part. He said it anyway. "Belle can carry 2. The woman looked at him for a long time. He watched her running the calculation, so who he might be, what he might want, what the risk was against what the alternative looked like. The alternative was walking alone through the dark in this country, bleeding, carrying whatever she was carrying. "I'm Evelyn," she said finally. "Evelyn Hale." "I know Red Rock some," he said. "I'll get you there." She didn't thank him again. She just walked to Belle's side and looked up at him, waiting for a hand up. He gave her one, pulling her up to ride behind him. The bundle she never let go of. He felt her settle, felt her straighten her spine so that she wouldn't have to hold on to him if she could help it. Her free hand rested light on the back of the saddle, not on him. He turned Belle east and touched her forward. They didn't speak for a while. The sun stretched their shadow long and thin across the ground ahead of them, and the heat began to ease by the smallest degree, the way it always did as evening came on. A mercy that arrived so slowly you almost didn't notice until it was there. The bundle shifted in Evelyn's arms and then made a sound. A small sound, soft and disoriented, the way a sleeping thing sounds when it wakes up somewhere unfamiliar. Caleb felt every muscle in his back go rigid. He didn't turn around. "That's a baby." "She is," Evelyn said, calm, final. He kept riding. Belle had good, steady ground manners and didn't seem troubled by the extra weight. Caleb had ridden this animal through worse than 3 people on one back, though that particular math had never quite come up before in that configuration. He kept her at a walk, not wanting to jar anything, and began adjusting his heading toward a low rock formation he knew was maybe 4 miles out, where a seep of water came up through the stone in a wet season. This hadn't been a wet season. But even in dry stretches, there was usually enough to refill a canteen and water a horse, if you were patient. He heard Evelyn murmuring to the child, barely above a whisper, in a voice entirely different from the one she'd used with him. Softer. The way voices change when they think no one is listening. "Shh. I know, baby. It's okay. Mama's here." He looked straight ahead. There had been a time in his life when that sound, a woman's voice, quiet and low over a baby, would have landed somewhere warm in him. It still landed somewhere, just not the same place. How old? He asked. He kept his voice even. 7 months, Evelyn said. Her name is June. She all right? Healthy? She's hungry. A pause. I've been managing. He filed that away. Didn't ask the rest of it yet. There's a seep I know, 4 miles more or less. We'll stop there, Waterbell. Rest while the light holds. You should eat something. I'm fine. I didn't ask, he said, not unkindly. I've got food and so does the horse. We're stopping either way. She was quiet for a moment. You're bossy for a man who says he doesn't want anything. I said I didn't want anything from you. That's different from having opinions. He heard something from behind him. A short exhale through the nose. Not quite a laugh. Not quite not. The seep was still producing. Not much. A thin trickle down the face of a granite shelf into a natural bowl that had been polished smooth by 1,000 years of the same water finding the same path. But enough. Belle drank carefully in the way horses do when the water is slow, and Caleb refilled the canteen twice. Evelyn sat with her back against the rock with June in her lap. The baby had woken fully by now and was regarding the world with the serious concentration that babies brought to everything, her dark eyes moving from the stone to the sky to her mother's face and back. She hadn't cried. That struck Caleb as a thing worth noting. A 7-month-old who'd spent God knows how long wrapped tight against a running woman in the West Texas heat, and she hadn't worked herself up into screaming. He made a small fire. Not from any need of warmth. The evening was still warm enough, but because he was making food and he didn't want to eat cold hardtack if he didn't have to. He had some salt pork and a handful of dried beans he'd been carrying since Lubbock, and he set those to warming in a tin pan while he broke up the hardtack and pretended it was useful. Evelyn watched him work without offering to help and without apologizing for not helping. He respected that. You want to tell me what happened back there, he said, or would you rather eat first? I'd rather not tell you at all, she said. That's fair. He stirred the beans. I'd rather not ask. But you're alone out here with a baby and no horse and blood on your face. So. She was quiet for a while. June made a small sound and grabbed at a fold of her mother's dress. Men from Garrison's outfit, Evelyn said finally. You know the name? He did. He kept his face still. Some. They came to the ranch 3 days ago. She spoke carefully, precisely, like someone reciting a list they'd memorized to keep from falling apart while they said it. My husband wasn't there. Hadn't been there for a while. They were looking for him, they said. Looking for something he'd taken. A pause. I didn't know what they meant. I still don't know if I believe that's true, but they made it very clear that I wasn't, that June and I weren't. She stopped, started again. They burned it. The house. While I was still inside. Caleb set down the spoon. I got out through the back with June, she continued. My horse spooked from the fire and pulled loose when I was trying to mount, and she ran. I had what I was carrying, and that was it. She looked down at the baby. I've been walking since the day before yesterday. The fire popped. Something skittered in the rocks above them, some small night hunting thing going about its business. The cut on your face, Caleb said. One of them grabbed me before I ran. She didn't say anything else about it. He looked at the fire for a moment. Then he took the pan off and portioned the beans into 2 cups and handed one to her. She took it. Garrison's men, he said. How many did you see? 4 at the ranch. There may be more. And your husband, do you know where he is? Something moved across her face. Complicated. I have an idea. Before he left, he mentioned a town called Cutter's Mill. That's where I'm trying to get to eventually. I thought Red Rock first to... She paused. I don't know. I was just trying to get away from there. Cutter's Mill is north of Red Rock, he said. 60 miles, give or take. She nodded. She'd known that. He drank some water, looked at June, who had fallen back asleep in her mother's arms with the effortless surrender that only very small children managed. You should sleep too, he said. I'll take first watch. You don't have to. I know, he said. Sleep anyway. He sat up with his back to the fire and listened to the dark. This was the part of the night he was most practiced at. The sitting. the listening. The particular silence that came after everyone else in whatever vicinity you occupied had gone quiet, leaving you alone with nothing but the sound of the land doing what it did. Wind, insects, the distant call of a nighthawk hunting, and the sound of your own mind doing what it did. His mind was rarely quiet. He'd made his peace with that. He thought about Garrison, thought about the way Evelyn had said the name. Careful, the way people said names they were afraid of, but were also done being afraid of. He thought about a woman who'd walked a day and a half through West Texas carrying a 7-month-old and never once stopped moving. He thought about Mara. He didn't try not to. He'd given up trying not to a while back. She came when she came, and the only thing he'd found that helped was not fighting it. She'd have been 32 this year. She would have known exactly what to say to Evelyn Hale. Some simple, direct thing that managed to be both practical and kind in the same breath. She'd had a gift for that. For finding the words that made a person feel like whatever they were carrying was manageable. He'd never had that gift. He was better with silence, with showing up, with doing the next necessary thing. That had seemed like enough, mostly, until it turned out it wasn't. He pushed away from that particular edge, stepped back from it. Garrison, Cutter's Mill, 4 men, possibly more. He looked back at Evelyn sleeping against the rock with her baby tucked against her side. Even in sleep, she hadn't relaxed entirely. One hand rested on June's back. The other was close to whatever she'd hidden in her skirt. He didn't ask himself why he was going to help her. He knew why. Not because it was smart, not because it made sense, simply because she'd walked a day and a half through the desert with a bleeding knee and a baby, and she hadn't asked a single soul for help until he'd handed her a canteen. And something about that, the particular kind of stubbornness that looked like dignity from a distance, was something he recognized. He turned back to the dark and kept watch. Morning came mean, the way West Texas mornings did. No gentle brightening, just a sudden hard light that arrived all at once and immediately began to heat things up. Caleb had let Evelyn sleep through his watch and most of hers, and was rebuilding the fire for coffee when he heard her wake behind him. A sharp intake of breath, that moment of not knowing where you are. Then quiet. Then the sound of her settling, remembering. "You let me sleep through," she said. Not an accusation, just noting it. You needed it more. She didn't argue that. She sat up, adjusted June, still sleeping, improbably, and pushed her loose hair back with both hands. In the early light, she looked younger and more tired, the two things going together in a way that was different from any softness. The cut on her cheek had scabbed overnight. She'd heal clean from it, most likely. "There's coffee," he said. You have coffee." A pause. "Actually, had it in Pecos, figured I'd—" He shrugged. "Figured." She was quiet while the coffee brewed in the small tin pot he carried. June woke while it was brewing, hungry and communicating that fact with increasing urgency, and Evelyn turned slightly away from him to feed her, not embarrassed, just private, while he poured 2 cups and left hers on the flat rock beside her. "You have a plan past Red Rock," he said. It came out more like a question than he'd intended. "Find my husband." The words were flat, not warm. Figure out what he got himself into. Figure out what to do about it. "And if he's not in Cutter's Mill?" She looked down at June. "I'll figure that out when I get there." "Garrison's men know you're heading east." "Probably." "They'll have someone in Red Rock." She looked at him then, direct. "I know." He drank his coffee. It was bad coffee. Too strong. The tin gave it a metallic edge. And it was the best thing he'd tasted in 2 weeks. "I'll take you to Red Rock," he said. "And if there's trouble there, I'll help you through it." Something shifted in her face. Why? He thought about it honestly. "Because you're in a bad situation that you didn't earn. You don't know that." "No," he agreed. "I don't. But I've got a general feeling." She looked at him for a long moment, something working in her eyes that he couldn't read and wasn't going to try. "I can't pay you." "I didn't ask. I'm telling you anyway, so you know where we stand." "We stand at a fire with bad coffee," he said. "That's where we stand." She looked away. Looked down at June, who had stopped fussing and was now examining her own hand with intense interest. Something moved at the corner of Evelyn's mouth. Not quite a smile, not nearly, and then was gone. "Bad coffee," she agreed. They made Red Rock by mid-afternoon of the next day. It wasn't much of a town. Never had been. A main street that ran 200 yards between a general store and a livery at either end, with a saloon, a rooming house, a barber, and a small dry goods establishment filling in the gaps. The church at the south end had a broken bell that nobody had gotten around to fixing. The water tower at the north end leaned slightly, and everybody trusted it anyway. Caleb came in from the west road with his eyes moving. He saw the horses first. 4 of them, hitched outside the saloon. Good stock, well kept, the kind of animals that cost money. Not ranch horses, not trail horses in the ordinary sense. These were horses that belonged to men who needed to be somewhere quick and stay ready. He didn't say anything to Evelyn. He didn't have to. He felt her sit up straighter behind him, felt her arm tighten slightly around June. "I see them," she said. "Don't look directly," he said. "Just right in natural." "I know how to do this," she said quietly. There was a flatness in her voice that told him she'd done it before, ridden through something dangerous and pretended otherwise. He didn't ask when. He rode Belle down the center of the street at an even walk, nodded to a man sitting on the general store porch, didn't look toward the saloon. "I need to get to the rooming house," Evelyn said under her breath. "Mrs. Carver, she knows me. She'll hide us." "Where is it?" "Left, past the barber." He turned left past the barber. The rooming house was a 2-story affair that looked like it had intended to be larger and then changed its mind. A hand-lettered sign said rooms by week or month. A woman with gray hair and flour on her apron was standing in the doorway like she'd been there waiting, which was the particular gift of people who ran establishments like this. They always seemed to know when someone was coming. Her eyes found Evelyn before they found Caleb, and something immediate happened in her expression. A shift from professional neutrality to something else. Concern. Recognition. "Evie," she said. "Lord, come inside." "Mrs. Carver, inside first," the woman said firmly, and stepped back from the door. Caleb dismounted, helped Evelyn down, took the reins. Evelyn was already moving toward the door, June awake and looking around with wide eyes at the new surroundings. She stopped at the threshold and looked back at him. "Are you coming in?" she said. It was a question, but it sounded like more than that. He tied Belle to the post. "I'll be right in," he said. "I want to walk back and see what we're dealing with." Her jaw tightened. "Don't." "I'm just looking," he said. "I'm not going to do anything stupid." She held his eyes for a moment. A search. Whatever she found there must have been satisfactory because she turned and went inside. He walked back to the main street slowly, hands loose at his sides. There were 4 of them, all right. 2 had come out of the saloon and were standing on the boardwalk, not speaking. One was watching the street, the other was rolling a cigarette with the particular unhurried movement of a man who had nowhere to be but wasn't going to say so. Caleb walked to the general store and bought 3 things he didn't particularly need. Some hardtack, a length of rope, a tin of matches, taking his time about it. The man behind the counter knew people in small towns, always knew people, and said nothing, but his eyes flicked toward the saloon and back in a way that said everything. On his way back, the man with the cigarette looked at him. Just looked, not threatening, just the long, measuring look of a man cataloging a stranger. Caleb nodded once, minimal, and kept walking. He counted them again. 4 horses. Could be more inside. Back at the rooming house, he found Evelyn in a small room on the ground floor with Mrs. Carver, who had produced from somewhere a tin of milk for June and was heating it over a small lamp with the efficiency of someone who had heated things for infants before and knew exactly how long it took. June was lying on the bed looking up at the ceiling and moving her arms the way very small people did when they were content enough to explore existing. Evelyn turned when he came in. 4, he said. The ones outside are watching the street. There may be more in the saloon. They know I'm here, she said. It wasn't a question. Maybe. Small town. News travels. He looked at Mrs. Carver. Is there a back way out of this building? The older woman's expression told him she'd been asked that before, too. Through the kitchen, she said. Into the alley, then south to the livery. He nodded. Good. He set his purchases down on the small table. We should move tonight. After dark, if that's... He stopped. Evelyn was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen from her before. Not the careful watchfulness or the controlled steadiness, something quieter than those. Something that was almost question, almost exhaustion, almost something he didn't have a word for. "You don't have to keep doing this," she said. Her voice was low, careful. "I'm aware of that. I mean," she paused, "you've already done more than... I'm just saying you don't owe me anything, Caleb. You can ride out of here and leave this behind." He looked at her, looked at June on the bed, looked at the cut on her face and the set of her shoulders that hadn't entirely let go since he'd found her. "I know I can," he said. He pulled the chair from the corner and sat down. "But I'm not going to." Mrs. Carver set the milk down and pretended she hadn't heard any of it, in the graceful way of people who'd learned when to be deaf. June reached up toward nothing in particular and made a sound that might have been satisfaction. The afternoon light came through the small window in a single bar of gold, and outside on the main street of Red Rock, Texas, 4 men waited with their horses and their patients and their employer's business. And in that small room, without ceremony, without anything being decided out loud, something shifted between a man who had been alone for 3 years and a woman who had been running for 3 days. Not trust. Not yet. They were a long way from trust. But something. The fragile, dangerous, stubborn beginning of it. End of part 1. The plan was simple enough that it could go wrong in about a dozen different ways, and Caleb knew all of them. They would wait until the saloon noise peaked, that hour somewhere between 10 and midnight when men got loud and stopped paying attention to the things they were supposed to be paying attention to. Mrs. Carver would watch the front of the house. Caleb would get Belle from the livery through a side arrangement he'd quietly made with the liveryman, a bow-legged man named Tuck, who had the expression of someone who'd been asked to look the other way before and had a reasonable rate for it. Evelyn would come through the kitchen with June, and they'd be gone south before anyone thought to check the rooming house. Simple. 12 ways wrong. He sat in the chair by the window in the small room and watched the street through the gap in the curtain while the afternoon went to evening and the evening went to dark. And Evelyn sat on the edge of the bed with June and did the things mothers do with babies in the particular language that doesn't use words. A touch on the back, a gentle rock, a soft sound in the throat that isn't quite a song. June had eaten and was fighting sleep with the conviction of a child who didn't want to miss anything, her eyes drooping and then opening wide as if she'd caught herself at something. They didn't talk for a long time. That was fine. Caleb had always been comfortable with silence, and Evelyn didn't seem like a woman who filled space with noise just because the alternative was quiet. It was her who spoke first. "Her father's name is Thomas," she said, not loudly, just putting the words in the room like she'd decided they had to go somewhere. "Thomas Hale. We were married 4 years ago in a town called Beaumont. He seemed like a steady man, the kind that knew how to work, knew what he wanted, didn't make promises he couldn't keep." A pause. "I was wrong about the last part." Caleb didn't say anything. He kept watching the street. "He got involved with Garrison's outfit about a year back," Evelyn continued. "I didn't know what Garrison was at first. Thomas said it was freighting work, supply runs. I asked him once why it paid so well, and he told me not to ask again." She looked down at June, who had finally surrendered to sleep, her small chest rising and falling with the complete abandon of the unconscious. "I should have asked more. I kept thinking, we had the ranch, we had land, June was coming. I kept thinking it would settle itself out." "It rarely does," Caleb said. He meant it as acknowledgement, not judgment. It landed somewhere between the two. "No." She smoothed a piece of June's hair with one finger. "About 2 months ago, Thomas told me he was leaving for a while. Didn't say how long. Didn't say what had happened. He kissed June on the head and walked out with a saddlebag, and that was the last I saw of him." Her voice didn't crack on that. It had the sound of something that had been said inside her head so many times it had worn smooth. "The men that came, they said he'd taken something from Garrison. Money, maybe. Or something worth money. I don't know if that's true. I don't know much of anything right now." "And you're going after him anyway," Caleb said. "He's June's father," she said, as if that settled the question. "That's not an answer." She looked up at him then, something sharp in her face. "It's the only answer I've got." He turned back to the window. "Fair enough." Outside, one of Garrison's men had come out of the saloon and was standing in the street, looking up and down it slowly. Not alarm, just the habitual scan of a man paid to pay attention. He stood there for a while and then went back inside. "What about you?" Evelyn said. "What about me? Where are you going? Before all this, where were you headed?" He was quiet long enough that she might have thought he wasn't going to answer. "Nowhere particular," he said. "That's not an answer either." He almost smiled at that. Almost. "I had a place north of San Antonio. Small operation. Cattle, mostly. My wife and I built it from not much over about 6 years. He kept his voice matter-of-fact, the way you did when the facts themselves were the dangerous part and the tone had to be careful. "She died 2 winters ago. Fever. Took about a week." He paused. "After that I sold the cattle and leased the land, and I've been moving around since." The room was very quiet. "I'm sorry," Evelyn said. "Not elaborate. Just that." "Yeah," he said. June made a small sound in her sleep and didn't wake. "Her name," Evelyn said, carefully. A question she might pull back if he looked like he didn't want it asked. "Mara," he said. She didn't say anything else about it. She didn't push at it or try to fill it with something. She just let it be there in the room, which was exactly right. He hadn't said the name out loud to anyone in a long time. It felt like pressing on a bruise, not pleasant, but proof that the thing was still there and still real. They went back to quiet, and this time it was a different kind of quiet than before. The slightly easier kind that comes between people when something true has been exchanged. Tuck came through on his end. Belle was waiting in the alley behind the livery, with her reins looped over a post and a note stuck to the saddle that said simply, settled up in handwriting that looked like it had been committed to paper under duress. Caleb had paid him double what was asked and figured that was worth the cooperation. Getting out of the rooming house was the part that nearly went wrong. Not because of Garrison's men, because of June. She woke up when Evelyn lifted her to move. Came awake in that way babies sometimes did. Not gradually, but all at once, from deep sleep to full distress in about 4 seconds. Evelyn clamped a hand gently over her daughter's mouth, not smothering, just muffling, and made the low sound, the particular maternal frequency that Caleb couldn't have described, but had the biological purpose of telling a distressed infant that the person holding them was safe. June fussed against it, pushed her small face into her mother's shoulder, made sounds that were muffled but absolutely not quiet. Mrs. Carver, bless her, chose exactly that moment to walk out the front door of the rooming house and engage the one man who'd remained outside, one of Garrison's, leaning against the post across the street, in what sounded like a detailed and entirely unreasonable complaint about the price of flour at the general store. The man's expression, visible from the kitchen doorway, was the exact expression of someone who had not planned to be talked at tonight and had no idea how to exit the situation. They went through the kitchen and down the alley without anyone looking their way. The south road was dark. Caleb kept Belle at a walk until they were clear of the town lights, then asked her for a trot that ate ground without making enough noise to carry. Evelyn had June wrapped against her chest in a length of cloth that Mrs. Carver had produced, and the baby, jostled by the movement, had subsided into something that wasn't quite sleep but wasn't crying either, the suspended state of a child whose body had decided that stillness was the safest option given the circumstances. They rode for 2 hours before Caleb slowed and looked back. Nothing. The dark was just the dark. He let out a breath and felt Evelyn do the same behind him. "We're clear," he said. "For now," she said. "For now," he agreed. They made camp in a dry creek bed where the cut banks were high enough to hide a fire from anyone on the road. Caleb built it small and low, the kind you could kill in seconds if you had to, and Evelyn sat across it from him with June in her lap and the particular stillness of a person who had been running on compressed tension for days and was now allowing themselves to decompress by exactly 1 careful degree. The hardtack he'd bought that afternoon was genuinely bad. He'd known it would be when he bought it. The general store in Red Rock had the look of a place that ordered supplies whenever it felt like it, which was not often, but it was food, and they ate it without complaint. Evelyn had some dried fruit in the cloth she'd tied into a rough bag when she left the ranch, small, dark pieces of something that might have been plum, and she shared them without being asked in the direct, practical way she had of doing things. "Cutter's Mill," Caleb said after a while. "Tell me what you know about it." "Small town. Mining started there about 15 years ago, played out mostly. Now I don't know exactly what it is now. Thomas mentioned it twice. Once 6 months ago when he was in a good mood and talking about a job that had gone well. Once when he left. She prodded at the fire with a stick. He said if anything happened, he'd find a way to get word to me through a man named Aldrich Porter. Said Porter ran a freighting office there. Porter, Caleb said. You know him? Heard the name. He thought about what he'd heard. Nothing good, but nothing specific enough to say out loud just yet. You think your husband is actually there? Or are you going because it's the only lead you have? The stick went still in her hand. She looked at him across the fire. Is there a difference right now? He considered that. I suppose not. He might be there, she said. He might be dead. The word came out without flinching. I've thought about both. I've been thinking about both for 2 months, but until I know something for certain, I have to go. She looked at June. She's going to ask about him someday. I need to be able to tell her I tried. That sat between them for a moment. Yeah, Caleb said. You do. June had fallen fully asleep now, curled in Evelyn's lap with one fist up near her chin, her breathing slow and even. The firelight moved across her face, and she was so entirely unbothered by the world she'd been born into. The running, and the burning, and the hard ground, and the strangers, that something about it was both tender and terrible to look at. Caleb looked away. You're good with her, Evelyn said. He realized she'd been watching him. I haven't done anything. You haven't made her nervous, she said. She's a pretty good judge of people, for someone who can't talk yet. Some men come near her and she knows. She gets stiff. A pause. She doesn't do that with you. He didn't know what to say to that. He turned his cup in his hands. My wife wanted children, he said. The words came out before he decided to say them. We tried for a couple of years, it didn't happen, and then he stopped. And then it was too late for that conversation. The fire made its quiet, small sounds. I'm sorry, Evelyn said again, the same way she'd said it before. No decoration, no performance. Just the acknowledgement of a thing that deserved acknowledging. He nodded. Were you happy? She asked. With her. Before. The question startled him, which was rare. Yes, he said after a moment. We used to argue about stupid things. Where to put the fence line. Whether the north pasture needed more water before the south one. She had opinions about everything, and she was right about most of them, which was occasionally intolerable. He paused. Yeah, we were happy. That's something, Evelyn said. It is, he agreed. She fed a small piece of wood to the fire. Thomas and I were happy once. I've been trying to figure out when we stopped being. The words were careful, exploratory, like she was finding out what she thought by hearing herself say it. I think it was gradual. I think he started wanting things he couldn't see a road to, and that frustration made him smaller, somehow. Less like himself. And then Garrison's money made him feel large again, and by the time I understood what that money was costing him, it was already. She closed her eyes briefly. I'm not entirely sure what kind of man I'm going to find in Cutter's Mill, if I find him. Might be best to figure that out before you get there, Caleb said. What do you mean? I mean, you should think about what you'll do in different situations. If he's there and safe and wants to come back with you, that's one situation. If he's there and in trouble with Garrison and it's more complicated, that's another. He stopped. If he's not there at all, she finished, or if he's dead. She said it steadily. I've thought about those. I just don't have answers yet. You don't need answers yet, he said. You just need to know you've thought about it. She looked at him. Is that what you told yourself? When you were figuring out how to keep going? The question reached somewhere he hadn't expected. He sat with it for a second. Something like that. After Mara died, I kept thinking I needed a plan, a direction, some clear thing to move toward. And eventually I figured out that the only thing I could actually do was get up the next morning and do the next thing that needed doing. Just that. One thing. He turned the cup again. It's not much of a philosophy. It kept you alive, she said. It kept me moving, he said. That's not exactly the same thing. She watched him for a moment. You're harder on yourself than you need to be. You don't know me well enough to know that. Maybe not. She shifted, settled June more securely in her lap. But I've been watching you for 2 days. You think before you speak. You don't posture. When you say you're going to do something, you do it. She paused. Thomas used to say that the easiest way to tell a man's character was to watch what he did when no one was keeping score. That's a reasonable measure. You're passing, she said simply, and looked back at the fire. It wasn't a compliment exactly. It was just a thing stated plainly, in her particular manner. He received it the same way. They rode north the next day on back roads that Caleb knew from an earlier period of his life when he'd moved cattle through this country. The main road was faster, but the main road was also where Garrison's men would be watching, and he wasn't ready for that confrontation yet. Not with Evelyn and June along, not without knowing more about the shape of what they were walking into. The landscape changed as they moved north, less flat, more broken. The earth folding up into rough, low hills with cedar growing in the draws and the occasional limestone outcrop thrusting up from the grass like a thought interrupting itself. The air was slightly different too, a degree or two cooler, enough to make a difference over a long day of riding. They stopped at noon beside a slow creek where the water was brown but clean enough, and Evelyn waded into the ankle to cool herself and let June sit in the shallows while holding her carefully upright. The baby was enchanted by the water, slapped at it with both hands, looked astonished when it splashed, slapped it again as if to confirm the discovery. Caleb watered Belle and sat on the bank and watched the two of them. He'd spent 3 years being careful not to look too long at things like that. Women with children, families at evening, any arrangement of people that looked like what a life was supposed to look like. The one he'd been building, the one he'd lost the blueprint for. He'd gotten so good at not looking that it had become reflex, a sideways habit that kept the worst of it at a manageable distance. He was looking now. He noticed that and let it be. "She's going to want to eat the creek," Evelyn said, pulling June's hand away from her mouth with the resigned efficiency of a parent who has had this exact fight 40 times. "Let her try it once," Caleb said. "She'll learn." Evelyn looked at him over her shoulder. "You've never met a child before, have you?" "I've met plenty of children." "Then you know they don't learn from eating creek water. They just eat more creek water and then they're sick." But there was something almost amused in her voice. Almost. "Fair point," he said. She carried June out of the water and sat beside him on the bank, and the three of them ate their noon meal in the particular easy quiet of people who have been moving together long enough that the logistics of it no longer require discussion. He handed her things, and she took them without ceremony. She handed June a piece of hardtack softened in water, and the baby gummed at it with the concentration of someone engaged in important work. "Tell me about Garrison," Caleb said. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "What do you know?" "I know the name. Know he runs a large operation out of the Eastern Hill Country. Freight, land, some cattle. Know he has a reputation for collecting debts aggressively." He paused. "Know that men who cross him tend not to stay visible for long." "That's accurate," she said, "from what I've understood." She watched June with the creek-soaked hardtack. "The men who came to the ranch, though, the one who grabbed me before I ran." Her jaw tightened. He wasn't scared of anything. Not of being seen, not of what he was doing, that kind of ease in doing something like that. It meant he'd done it before and nothing had ever happened to him for it. Caleb was quiet. "I'm not telling you that to frighten you," she said. "I know. I'm telling you because I need you to understand that if you're going to stay involved in this, it isn't—" She looked at him. "It isn't safe. It isn't some passing trouble. These are men who will kill someone and not lose sleep." "I know what men like that are," he said. He kept his voice flat because he did know, and the knowing didn't feel like something to dramatize. She held his gaze for a moment. Searching, that same searching look she'd turned on him at the beginning. "How?" she said. He looked at the creek. "I was a lawman for 8 years," he said. "Before Mara, before the ranch, U.S. Marshal's office, out of San Antonio." He paused. "I've dealt with men like Garrison's outfit. I know how they operate. I know what they'll do and what they won't do, and I know where the edges are." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. "Why did you stop?" "Because Mara asked me to," he said, simply. She'd waited long enough. The creek moved past them at its own slow pace, indifferent to everything. "And now you're back in it," she said. Looks like. She turned away, picked up June, stood up from the bank with that particular smooth efficiency she had, that nothing-wasted way of moving. She looked out across the creek for a moment, and he saw something in her profile. Not peace, not resolution, just the look of a person who was carrying a lot of weight and had made their peace with carrying it. "I don't want you to get killed on my account," she said. "I'll do my best," he said. She looked at him sideways. "That's not reassuring." "It's honest," he said. "I figure that's worth more." She didn't disagree. She shifted June to her hip, and June immediately grabbed a fist of her mother's hair and pulled, and Evelyn said "ow" in the exasperated tone of someone who had experienced this particular betrayal many times and still hadn't found a way to prevent it. And something happened in Caleb's chest, some small, unprepared-for movement, like a door opening an inch that he hadn't expected to find unlocked. He stood up and brushed off his pants and went to get Belle. The town of Seco Crossing was 20 miles south of Cutter's Mill, which made it a reasonable stopping point, and Caleb knew the owner of the only legitimate guest house there, a man named Booth Adler, who had done some work for the marshal's office back in the years when Caleb was still in that line. Not a friend exactly. A man who owed him something. That was almost better. They arrived in the early evening, and Booth took one look at Caleb and another look at the woman and baby behind him and said, "I'm going to ask you exactly 0 questions about any of this." "Appreciated," Caleb said. Booth gave them a room in the back of the building, separate from his regular guests, with a window that faced the rear yard rather than the street. "There's been 2 men through here in the last week asking about a woman traveling alone," he said, low, while Evelyn was inside settling June. "I told them I hadn't seen anyone. That remains true as far as I'm concerned." Caleb looked at him steadily. "Thank you, Booth." "Don't thank me. Just don't bring trouble to my door if you can avoid it." "Working on it." He went inside and found Evelyn sitting on the floor with June, who had discovered that the braided rug in the center of the room had a texture worth investigating and was working her fingers through it with scientific rigor. Evelyn looked up. "We're safe here tonight," he said. "Man that owns this place is reliable." She nodded. She was pale under the road dust, and he could see by the way she held her neck that she'd had a headache going for a while and hadn't said anything about it. "When did it start?" he said. She looked at him. "When did what start?" "The headache." She blinked. "This morning," she said after a moment. "How did you—" "The way you're holding your neck," he said, "and the way you've been squinting on the right side since about noon." She sat back on her heels. She had the look of someone not accustomed to being noticed in the small ways. "It's fine, it'll pass." "There's a water basin on the table. Cold cloth on the back of the neck helps sometimes." "I know what helps a headache," she said, but not sharply. Softer than that. "I know you do," he said. She looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at June, who had moved on from the rug and was now attempting to remove her own sock, which was more complex a project than she'd anticipated. "Caleb," Evelyn said. "Yeah. Why are you actually doing this?" He stood in the doorway with his shoulder against the frame and thought about that honestly, the way he tried to think about things when they deserved thinking about. She'd asked him before, at the rooming house, and he'd said she was in a situation she hadn't earned. That was still true, but it wasn't complete anymore. "Because I haven't given a damn about anything for 3 years, he said, "and it turns out that's not sustainable." He paused. "I don't know you well. I don't know what we're riding into or how it ends. But this is the first time in a long time that I've been somewhere I felt like I was supposed to be." The room was very quiet. June finally got the sock off, held it up triumphantly, examined it, and stuck it in her mouth. Evelyn said "June" in the automatic voice of a parent and took it away, and June looked personally affronted. "She does that with everything," Evelyn said. Her voice was different now, quieter. She needs to know how things feel, I think. She can't figure out the world by looking at it yet. She needs to hold it." Caleb thought about that. "That's not the worst way to go about it." Evelyn looked at him, something in her eyes that wasn't quite the careful watchfulness he'd come to recognize. Something more open than that, and more uncertain, and, he thought, a little frightened in the way you got frightened when something unexpected happened that wasn't bad. She looked away. "You should eat," she said. "I think Booth's wife cooks." She does, he said. It's better than my coffee, at minimum. The exhausted ghost of a real smile crossed her face, the first one he'd seen. It changed her entirely. Not softer exactly, but different, present in a way she mostly kept herself from being. That's a low bar, she said. Most things worth getting to are on the other side of a low bar, he said. She looked at him once more, and this time she let it last a second longer than necessary, which was a thing she hadn't done before. Then she looked down at June, who had found the sock again and was examining it with renewed determination. He went to arrange the food. Outside, the evening settled over Secco Crossing in gradual shades of blue, and the road north sat quiet and waiting. 20 miles to Cutter's Mill, 20 miles to whatever Thomas Hale had gotten himself into, and whatever Evelyn would find when she got there, and whatever either of them was going to do about Garrison's men, who were still moving, still looking, still somewhere behind them on the same road. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, there was Booth's wife's cooking and a room with a rug that June found fascinating, and a man and woman who had both been hollowed out by different losses sitting across a table from each other for the third evening in a row, finding out that the space between people didn't have to be empty just because it hadn't been filled. They didn't fall into anything that night, didn't cross any line they couldn't step back from. What happened was quieter than that and, in its own way, harder to name. They talked until the candle burned low, about nothing important, and then about things that were. And when the pauses came, they didn't fill them, just let them be what they were. And Caleb, who had not slept well in 3 years, who woke most mornings at 4 with his hand already reaching for a woman who wasn't there, slept that night without reaching for anything. He didn't notice that until morning. When he did, he lay still for a moment, looking at the ceiling, feeling the particular quality of the silence around him. Somewhere in the next room, June was awake and talking to herself in the private language of early morning that babies used, not crying, not calling for anyone, just narrating something to no one, completely content. He lay there and listened, and waited for the grief to settle back in the way it always did. This morning, it settled differently. Still there, but shifted, like furniture moved in a familiar room. The room was the same room, but you stood in it a little differently now. He got up, put his boots on, and went to start the coffee. The coffee was bad again. Not as bad as his own, which had set a standard he was apparently committed to beating downward, but close. Booth's wife, a stout woman named Clara, who moved through her kitchen like she was mildly angry at it, had produced a pot of something dark and functional, and left it on the table without ceremony. Caleb drank 2 cups before Evelyn appeared in the doorway, with June on her hip and the look of someone who had slept but not enough. She sat down across from him. He poured her a cup without asking. She took it without thanking him, which had become their particular shorthand for things that didn't need to be said anymore. "How far to Cutter's Mill from here?" she said. 20 miles on the main road. 15 if we take the creek route through the hills. Longer, harder on Bell, but less visible." She held the cup in both hands and looked at the table. He could see her working through it, the variables, the risk on each side, the question of whether the time saved on the main road was worth the exposure. "Creek route," she said. "That's what I figured." June reached for the coffee cup with the absolute conviction of someone who had no idea what was in it but wanted it anyway, and Evelyn redirected her hand to a piece of torn bread that Clara had left on the table. June accepted this trade with temporary goodwill. Booth came in from the front of the house with his boots already on, and a look that meant he'd been up earlier than either of them. "You've got a problem," he said, and pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down, because Booth had never in his life waited to be asked to sit. One of Garrison's men came through before dawn, asking about a man and woman traveling together, with a child. He looked at Caleb. "I told him I'd seen a couple come through yesterday, headed east toward Laredo. He seemed to accept it." "Seemed," Caleb said. "Seemed," Booth confirmed. "He didn't argue with me, but he stayed another hour before he left, which is a man who's not sure he believes you, but doesn't have a better option." Evelyn put her cup down. "How many are there? Total?" "He was alone when he came to me, but there were tracks on the south road this morning, 3, maybe 4 horses moving north. Came through in the night." Booth looked at Evelyn. "Ma'am, someone told them which direction you were headed. Maybe in Red Rock, maybe before. But they've got a general idea." The room was quiet for a moment. "We leave in an hour," Caleb said. I'd say sooner, Booth said. They left in 40 minutes. The creek route was exactly what Caleb had described, longer and harder. The hills pushed up through the cedar in irregular, unhelpful ways, and the creek itself had enough curves in it that their actual progress north was about half what the distance felt like. Belle moved carefully on the broken ground, picking her footing with the deliberate intelligence of an animal who had done this before and knew the cost of a misstep. Evelyn rode behind him with June in the wrap against her chest and said nothing for the first hour, which suited him. He needed to think, and thinking required quiet. He was mapping the situation in the methodical way the marshal's years had taught him. Not just what he knew, but what the other side knew, what they'd do with that knowledge, where the angles were. Garrison's men knew the general direction. They didn't know the creek route, probably, or they'd have been on it already. They'd expect the main road. They'd set up ahead of Cutter's Mill, most likely a pinch point, somewhere the road narrowed. Standard sense. You didn't chase if you could intercept, which meant Cutter's Mill itself might be clear when they arrived, or nearly so. That was one scenario. He held the others alongside it and didn't like most of them. "You're quiet," Evelyn said, behind him. "Thinking." "About what?" "About what we do when we get there. Whether Porter's office is the first stop, or whether we find somewhere to leave you and June first while I go look." Her hand on the saddle went still. "I'm not staying behind." "I didn't say you were. I said I was thinking about it." "Think differently," she said. "I'm not staying behind while you walk into something alone. That's not—" She stopped. Started again, more evenly. "If Thomas is there, I need to be the one he sees first. And if something else is there instead, I want to know what it is at the same time you do. Not an hour later, when you come back and decide how much to tell me." He couldn't argue with the logic of that. He also noticed she'd said, "Decide how much to tell me," with the specific edge of a woman who had been managed before and knew the flavor of it. "All right," he said. She didn't say anything else, but the hand on the saddle relaxed. Cutter's Mill appeared around a long hillside curve in the early afternoon, a town that had clearly been built with ambition and then revised downward. The original main street was wide, laid out for a boom that had lasted about 7 years before the ore played out and half the population left. What remained was functional in a diminished way. Buildings that had been substantial once and were now just adequate. Businesses that served the smaller permanent population and the occasional freight traffic on the North Road. Aldrich Porter's freighting office sat at the north end of the main street. A weathered sign, a loading dock with nothing on it, 2 wagon wheels leaning against the wall, as if they'd been set there temporarily 15 years ago. Caleb studied the street from the tree line before they rode in. His old habit. Nothing obviously wrong. No horses, he recognized. No men in the particular loose stance of people waiting for something specific. Just a town going about its reduced afternoon business. "I don't see anyone," Evelyn said. "That doesn't mean they're not there," he said. "Give it another minute." She gave it another minute. He watched the roof lines, the alleys, the doorways. Nothing moved that shouldn't move. A dog crossed the street in the unhurried way of a dog who owned the street. 2 women came out of what looked like a dry goods store and walked in the opposite direction. "All right," he said. They rode in slow. The freighting office had a closed look, shutters half drawn, no activity on the loading dock. Caleb dismounted and tied Belle to the post, helped Evelyn down, and knocked on the front door with the back of his knuckles. 3 times. Waited. Movement inside. A pause that had the quality of someone looking through a gap at who was on the other side. Then the door opened 6 inches on a chain, and an eye looked out at them. Pale, tired, belonging to a man about 60 with white hair badly in need of cutting and the careful expression of someone who had been careful for a long time. "Aldrich Porter," Caleb said. "Who's asking?" "My name's Mercer. This is Evelyn Hale. She says her husband mentioned your name." The pale eye moved to Evelyn, stayed on her for a moment, then to June, then back to Evelyn. The chain came off. The door opened. "Get inside," Porter said. "Don't stand in the street." The inside of the office was cluttered in the way of a man who handled a great deal of paper and had made his peace with not organizing it. Ledgers, manifests, a desk covered in correspondence, a cot in the back corner that suggested Porter spent more time here than at any house he might own. The shutters, seen from inside, were cracked just enough to see the street. Porter didn't sit down. He stood in the center of the room and looked at Evelyn with something that was trying to be neutral and not quite managing it. "You look like you've been through some things," he said. "I have," she said. "Where's Thomas?" Porter's expression told Caleb most of what he needed to know before the man said a word. The particular quality of a person deciding how to deliver information they've been holding and not looking forward to releasing. "Sit down," Porter said. "Tell me where he is," Evelyn said. She didn't sit. Porter looked at Caleb as if seeking something there. "Tell her," Caleb said quietly. Porter turned back to Evelyn. "Thomas came here 8 days ago," he said. "He was in bad shape, scared. He'd taken something from Garrison, a ledger, from what he told me. Names, transactions, the kind of record that would ruin Garrison if it got to the right people." He paused. "He said he'd been trying to work up the nerve to use it for 3 months, and then Garrison moved on some people Thomas knew, and he decided he was done waiting." Evelyn was very still. "Where is he now?" "He left here 6 days ago," Porter said. "He was headed for the federal marshal's office in Fairfield, said he was going to turn the ledger over and testify." Another pause. "I haven't heard from him since." The room held that for a moment. "He's not dead," Evelyn said. It came out with more force than certainty. "I don't know that he is," Porter said carefully. "I don't know that he isn't. 6 days is a long time with Garrison's men on the road." Evelyn turned away from both of them. She stood facing the shuttered window, one hand on the wall, and Caleb watched her back, watched the breath go in and come out, watched her hold herself together the way she had from the beginning, not by being unaffected, but by being more stubborn than whatever was affecting her. June, somehow sensing the quality of the silence, made no sound. Caleb let it be for a moment. Then he said, "Porter, the ledger. Is there a copy?" Porter looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean, did Thomas make a copy of it before he left? Did he leave anything with you? Anything that could be used the same way the original could?" Porter was quiet for a beat too long. "Porter," Caleb said. "He left a set of pages," Porter said finally. "Not the full ledger. A partial copy. Names and numbers, enough to be useful," he said. "He said if he didn't get word to me within 10 days, I should find someone reliable to take them north." 10 days, Caleb said. "How many days left?" 4. Evelyn turned around. Her face was composed in the way it got when she was composing it deliberately, the effort visible only in the slight tension around her eyes. "Can we see them?" Porter looked between them. He made a decision. Caleb could see it. A man choosing one kind of risk over another. He went to the desk, moved a stack of manifests, and pulled out a flat oilskin-wrapped package from underneath. He held it for a moment, then put it on the desk. "You understand what that is," he said. "If Garrison's people find it here, I'm a dead man. If they find it with you—" "We understand," Caleb said. Porter looked at him steadily. "Who are you exactly?" "Someone who knows what to do with that," Caleb said, "and someone with a reason to do it." He paused. "I spent 8 years in the marshal's service. I know people in Fairfield. If Thomas didn't make it there, I know who to take that to instead." Porter held his eyes for a long moment. Whatever he was looking for, he found enough of it. He pushed the package across the desk. Caleb picked it up and put it inside his jacket. They were nearly to the door when it happened. Caleb heard it before he understood it. A sound from outside, muffled by the walls, but with a particular quality. Hooves, moving fast and then stopping. More than one horse, the kind of stop that wasn't a casual arrival. He put his hand out to the side, not touching Evelyn, but in front of her, and she stopped immediately, reading him. He moved to the shuttered window and looked through the crack. 3 horses. 3 men dismounting in front of the office with the coordinated unhurriedness of men who knew they had the numbers and weren't in a hurry because of it. He recognized one of them. Not personally, but by type. The particular kind of man Garrison employed. Capable, deliberate, not given to excess unless it was required. "Back door," Caleb said, low. He turned to Porter. "Is there one?" "Storage room," Porter said, pointing. His voice had dropped to almost nothing. "Door in the back wall. Opens to the alley." "Take this," Caleb said to Evelyn, and handed her the revolver from his hip. She took it without hesitation, shifted June in the wrap so the gun hand was free. Her face was the face he'd come to know. Not calm exactly, but past panic, operating in the practical register that some people found in emergencies and others never did. He pulled the rifle from where he'd left it leaning against the wall by the door. He never went anywhere without knowing where it was, and moved toward the front of the room. "Go with her," he said to Porter. "Get her out the back. Once you're clear, you keep moving and you don't come back here." "What are you going to do?" Evelyn said. "I'm going to make sure they don't follow you." "Caleb, go," he said. He kept his voice quiet and even. "Please." She held his eyes for a second. 1 second, in which something passed between them that was not a plan or an instruction, but something more fundamental. An acknowledgement, a transfer, the specific weight of one person trusting another with the most important thing they had. Then she turned and went through the storage room. He heard Porter behind her, the soft thud of the back door. He positioned himself to the left of the front door, back to the wall, rifle up. The voices outside had moved to the porch now. He could hear them, low, not rushed. The consultation of men who were going to do what they'd come to do and were just settling the logistics. The door handle turned. Caleb let them get it half open before he spoke. "Far enough," he said. The door stopped. A beat of silence. Then a voice. Medium, careful, the voice of the man he'd pegged as the capable one. "We've got no quarrel with you, friend." "You've got 3 guns aimed at a freighting office," Caleb said. "That's a quarrel with someone." "We're looking for property belonging to our employer. A packet of documents taken without permission. We have reason to believe it's in this office." A pause. "Hand it over and everyone goes home." "I don't have any documents," Caleb said. Another pause, slightly longer. "Then you won't mind us taking a look?" "I do mind," he said. "I mind considerably." The silence that followed had the specific texture of men outside a door doing arithmetic. How many? How positioned? What the odds were if they came through fast. He knew what they were calculating because he'd calculated it himself from this side enough times to know what it felt like. He moved. Not toward the door, away from it, back and to the right, putting the heavy desk between himself and the entrance. He wasn't trying to win a firefight with 3 men in a closed room. He was trying to buy time. Enough time for Evelyn and June to be 2 streets over, 4 streets. Gone. The door came in fast. The first man through was quick, professional, and was looking at the wrong part of the room. Caleb put the rifle stock into the doorframe at ankle height, an old trick. And the man's forward momentum did the rest, sending him down hard onto the plank floor. The second man caught himself in the doorway, smart enough not to follow blindly, and Caleb was already moving again, the desk between them, the third man not yet through the door. "Stop," said the man in the doorway. He had a gun pointed at Caleb. Steady. Experienced. Caleb stopped. They looked at each other across the wrecked room. The first man getting to his hands and knees, swearing. The third man finally coming in from the left. And Caleb ran the numbers one more time and arrived at the same answer. "Where are the documents?" the man in the doorway said. "I told you," Caleb said. "I don't have any documents." "Search him," the man said, without looking away. The third man came at him from the side. Caleb let him pat down his jacket. Let him find nothing, because there was nothing to find. The package was with Evelyn, had been since he handed her the gun. He'd moved it when he handed her the revolver, palmed it in the transition, tucked it into her wrap before she'd realized it, because old habits were old for a reason. The third man stepped back. "Nothing." The man in the doorway didn't change expression. He looked at Caleb for a long moment. "Where's the woman?" "What woman?" "Don't," the man said, not loudly. "We tracked 2 horses to this town. We know she came with you." "She left," Caleb said. "Before you got here." "I don't know which direction." The man studied him. "You're going to a lot of trouble for someone you just met." "I meet people differently than you do," Caleb said. Something shifted in the man's face. Not anger. Assessment. He was recalibrating, filing things away. "You've got a marshal's look about you," he said. "Former," Caleb said. "Former," the man repeated. He lowered the gun, which was not reassurance. It was the gesture of a man who had already decided what he was going to do and didn't need the visual threat. My employer's argument is with the Hale family, with what was taken. You're not part of that argument. I am now, Caleb said. The man looked at him for one more measuring moment. Then he said something to the first man, still on the floor, one knee up. And the first man got to his feet, and the three of them backed out of the door in the unhurried way of people who were not done but were leaving anyway, because this particular moment had run its course. The door swung half shut behind them. Caleb stood very still until he heard the horses. 3 sets of hooves moving south, deliberate. Not the retreat of men who were finished, but the repositioning of men who were going to try again from a different angle. He was out the back door 30 seconds later. He found them 4 blocks east, in the narrow space between a shuttered assay office and a building that had been a bathhouse and wasn't anymore. Evelyn was standing with her back to the wall, June in the wrap, the revolver in her hand pointed at the alley entrance, and Porter was beside her looking like a man who had aged 5 years in the last 20 minutes. She turned when she heard him. The gun came down. "Are you hurt?" she said immediately. "No." Her breath came out in a short, hard gust. "I heard it from here. I heard them go in." Her voice was steady, but only just. "I almost—" She stopped. "I know," he said. "I wasn't going to leave," she said. It came out with an edge that was half anger and half something else. "I want you to understand that. I was not going to just walk away if—" "I know," he said again, and meant it differently this time. He did know. He'd counted on it, in some complicated way he hadn't fully examined. But you needed to take the package. That was the right move. She looked at him, at the fact of him standing in front of her, intact. Something moved in her face, that thing that happened sometimes when people had been holding themselves together under pressure, and the pressure shifted by 1 degree. Not collapse, just movement, just the face doing what it needed to do. She handed him back the revolver and looked away. "They're going south," Caleb said. "Not gone. Repositioning. We have some time, but not a lot." He looked at Porter. "Is there someone in this town you trust to get you somewhere safe for a few days?" "My sister," Porter said. 2 miles east off the main road." "Go there," Caleb said. "Don't come back to the office. Wait for word from me." He paused. "If you don't hear from me in 10 days, take what you know to Fairfield yourself. Use the name Harlan Webb at the federal office. Tell him Caleb Mercer sent you." Porter looked like a man with more objections than he had time for. "And what are you going to do?" "Find Thomas Hale," Caleb said. He glanced at Evelyn. "Or find out what happened to him." Evelyn was looking at him with the full weight of what that meant. "Thomas is, regardless of what he did or didn't do," she said carefully. "He's June's father. If there's a way to—" "I know," he said. "I'm going to try." She held his gaze. Then she nodded once. The kind of nod that was also an acceptance, an acknowledgement of risk, a handing over of something she couldn't hold alone. Porter left. The alley was quiet for a moment. June made a small sound, comfortable and oblivious, and reached out to pat the wall beside her mother as if approving of the texture. "You moved the package," Evelyn said, "when you handed me the gun." "Yes." "You did it without telling me." "Yes." "You trusted me to carry it without asking." He thought about that. "I didn't think about it as trust exactly," he said. "I just thought you were the safer option." She looked at him for a long moment. He expected her to say something about the decision, about being moved around without being told. Instead, she said, "When they had you in there, did you—" She stopped. "I was fine," he said. "You don't know what I was going to ask." "You were going to ask if I was scared," he said. She paused. "Were you?" He thought about it honestly. "A little," he said. "Mostly I was thinking about whether you'd had enough time." She looked at him with an expression he didn't have a category for yet. It wasn't the careful watchfulness anymore. It wasn't the controlled steadiness. It was something quieter and more exposed. The look of a person standing in a place they hadn't planned to be and finding out they were not as unhappy about it as they might have expected. She looked at June. Her hand came up to the back of her daughter's head. That automatic, unconscious movement that was purely reflex, purely love. "We should move," she said. We should, he agreed. He took the package from her wrap and put it back inside his jacket. His fingers brushed her hand in the process. Accidental, brief, not worth mentioning. She didn't pull away from it. He didn't acknowledge it. They came out of the alley and turned north, away from the sound of Porter's retreating footsteps, away from the direction the three horses had gone. Belle was where he'd left her, patient as stone, and he untied her and helped Evelyn up and mounted behind them. The afternoon was deep gold now, the kind that happened in the hour before the light began to lose its grip, and Cutter's Mill fell behind them as they moved through it and out the other side. Somewhere between here and Fairfield, on a road Caleb knew the shape of, a man named Thomas Hale was either making his way to a federal office or wasn't. Either way, they were going to find out. And something else was true now, something that hadn't been true in Red Rock or on the Creek route or in Secco Crossing, something that had changed in the alley behind the assay office when Evelyn had asked if he'd been scared and he'd told her the truth about what he'd been thinking. He wasn't sure either of them had named it yet. He wasn't sure naming was required. Belle moved north carrying all three of them, and the evening opened up ahead like something that might still go either way. And for the first time in a long time, Caleb found that the uncertainty didn't feel like emptiness. It felt, cautiously and without any particular grace, like the opposite. That night they made camp off the Fairfield Road, in a stand of live oaks that closed around them like a room. Evelyn cried that night. Not loudly, not for long, and she thought he was asleep. He wasn't. He lay on his side with his back to her and listened to the sound of it, the specific exhausted grief of a woman who had held herself together by main force for too long and had found, in the dark, that she could finally stop holding. He didn't roll over. He didn't speak. He didn't try to fix it. He just stayed awake in the dark, close enough that she knew he was there if she needed to know it, far enough that she had the privacy she needed to fall apart in. Eventually the sound stopped. Then the breathing slowed and evened out. He stayed awake a little longer, listening to the oaks move in the night wind, one hand flat on the ground between them. Not reaching, just present, just there. That was what he had. It was what he could give. For tonight, it was enough. She didn't mention the crying in the morning. He didn't either. That was one of the things he'd come to understand about Evelyn Hale in the days they'd been moving together. She kept a strict accounting of what needed to be said and what didn't, and she rarely got the two confused. What had happened in the dark under the live oaks was private, and it had served its purpose, and the morning was a different thing from the night. She woke before him, had June fed and changed by the time he got the fire going, and sat across from him with her coffee and her composed face and her eyes that were slightly clearer than they'd been the day before, the way eyes sometimes looked after a person had finally let something drain. He handed her the hardtack and she took it, and they ate in the early light without talking, and that was fine. What wasn't fine was the sound Belle made when Caleb went to saddle her. It was a slight thing, a short exhale, a shift of weight when he cinched the girth, the way she held her left foreleg a degree off the ground. He ran his hand down it immediately, feeling the heat before he saw the swelling, a soft knot just above the fetlock that hadn't been there the evening before. He stood up and looked at her, and she looked back at him with the patient expression of an animal communicating something she'd been waiting for him to notice. "How bad?" Evelyn said. She was behind him, watching. "Not bad enough to be a crisis," he said. "Bad enough that I can't push her." He straightened up. "She needs a day, maybe two. No weight on it." A silence. They both understood what that meant for the road to Fairfield. "Can she walk it?" Evelyn said. "If we don't ride her." "Slowly," he said. "Short distances." "How far to the next town?" 6 miles on this road, place called Rylea. Not much there, but there's a farrier." He rubbed Belle's nose. "If I wrap it and we walk her in easy, she'll be all right. It'll just take most of the morning." Evelyn looked at the road, then at the tree line behind them, south, the direction Garrison's men had gone. The calculation was visible in her face. The time this would cost, what that time meant, whether they had it to spend. "Then we walk," she said. He nodded. He wrapped Belle's foreleg with a strip of cloth he kept in the saddlebag for exactly this kind of thing, and they broke camp and started north on foot, Belle moving beside them at an easy lead, June in the wrap against Evelyn's chest, watching the road with her usual grave attention. The morning was cool, the kind that wouldn't last past 9, and the walking was not unpleasant except for the fact that 6 miles on foot with one eye on the road behind you was a different thing from 6 miles on horseback. Caleb stayed to Evelyn's right, between her and the open country, which she noticed and didn't comment on. They'd been walking for maybe 30 minutes when she said, "Tell me about the Marshall years." He looked at her sideways. "Why?" "Because we've got 6 miles to cover, and I'd rather hear something than count my own footsteps." He considered it. "Not a lot of it makes for pleasant telling." "I'm not looking for pleasant." That was fair. 8 years, he said. Started in San Antonio, worked East Texas mostly, sometime in the Panhandle, chasing people who didn't want to be caught, serving writs on people who didn't want to receive them, occasionally standing between someone dangerous and someone who couldn't defend themselves. He paused. "I was good at it. I wasn't always sure that was a good thing to be good at." "Why not?" "Because being good at it meant being comfortable with the uglier parts of it, with walking into bad situations and not flinching. After a while, you start to wonder whether the not flinching is courage or whether you've just misplaced the part of you that knows how to be afraid." She was quiet for a moment. "Which was it?" "Both, probably, depending on the day." June reached out and grabbed a fistful of air in the direction of a passing bird, missing it by a considerable margin, and then examined her empty hand with the focused disappointment of a scientist whose hypothesis had failed. "Was Mara afraid?" Evelyn asked. "When you were doing that work?" It was the first time she'd used Mara's name. He noticed that. "Yes," he said. "She was afraid the right amount. She worried when she should have worried, and she didn't catastrophize when she shouldn't have. She was measured about it." He watched the road. "She never asked me to quit. She understood what the work was. But there was a particular kind of quiet she'd get into when I'd been gone a long time, a kind of held breath quality to things when I came back, like she was waiting to see if I'd come back different." "Did you?" "Every time," he said. "Not always in ways I could explain." Evelyn thought about that. "Thomas got quieter too," she said, "when he came back from Garrison's jobs. Not the same as before, I mean. He used to talk in the evenings, about the land, about what he wanted to do with the North pasture, about ideas he had. After Garrison, he just sat. I'd try to draw him out, and it was like there was glass between us. I could see him, but I couldn't reach him." "What do you think he was carrying?" Caleb said. She took a moment. "Shame, maybe. I think he knew what Garrison was by the time he was in deep enough to understand it, and I think the knowledge of what he'd been part of sat on him. And he couldn't tell me because then I'd know too, and he couldn't stand the idea of me knowing." She adjusted June in the wrap. "That's what I've decided anyway. I could be wrong." "You probably aren't," he said. "That's what that kind of quiet usually means. You know it from the other side," she said, "coming home with things you couldn't say." "Yeah," he said. "I know it from the other side." Belle moved steadily at the end of her lead, her wrapped legs swinging careful and even. A hawk made long circles over the country to the east. The morning light was doing what it always did this time of year, going from clear to merciless in increments, the blue of the sky deepening toward the white that meant heat. "Do you think he's alive?" Evelyn said. She asked it quietly, looking at the road ahead. Caleb was honest with her. He'd decided at the start that she deserved that. "I think it's possible," he said. "Fairfield is 70 miles from Cutter's Mill. If he left 8 days ago and was careful, he could have made it. The federal office there has people I worked with. If Thomas walked in with that ledger, they'd have taken him seriously and put him somewhere protected." He paused. "That's the best case." "What's the worst case?" "Garrison's people got ahead of him on the road." She absorbed that. "And the middle case?" "He's somewhere between here and there, stopped, hiding, waiting." He looked at her. "In which case we might find him on the road." She didn't say anything to that, but she walked a little straighter, which was the Evelyn Hale version of holding on to something. Riley was 6 buildings and a water tower and a farrier who looked at Belle's leg and said it wasn't as bad as it looked, which was the most useful thing anyone had said all day. His name was Graff, and he had the large, quiet hands of a man who'd spent decades talking to animals. And Belle stood still while he worked with an ease she didn't always extend to strangers, which Caleb took as a reasonable endorsement. "Day's rest," Graff said. I can put a proper poultice on it, keep the swelling down. You push her today, you'll be looking at something worse in 3 days. Tomorrow morning? Caleb said. Tomorrow morning she'll be better. Not 100%. 80. Don't ask more than that from her for another couple of days. He paid Graf and left Belle in his care and went to find Evelyn. She was at the far end of the building, sitting on a low bench with June in her lap, and she had a look on her face that he'd learned to identify as the look she got when she was thinking about something and hadn't decided how to say it yet. He sat down beside her and waited. I need to ask you something, she said, and I need you to answer honestly, not kindly. Those aren't always different things, he said. They are with this. She looked at him. When we find Thomas, if we find him, and the situation is complicated, if he's done things that make coming back with us difficult or dangerous, or... She paused. I need to know if you'll still be there, or if the situation being complicated will change what you're willing to do. He thought about the question seriously, which it deserved. I'm not going to tell you I'll do anything regardless of what Thomas has done, he said. That wouldn't be honest. But I'll tell you this. Whatever he's done, it isn't your sin and it isn't June's. My interest is in getting the two of you somewhere safe and making sure Garrison can't come after you again. Thomas's situation is part of that whether I like it or not. She studied him. That's not a clean answer. No, he agreed. It isn't. It's honest, though. It's what I've got. She looked at June, who had fallen asleep against her, cheek flat on her mother's chest, the absolute trusting collapse of a sleeping infant. I used to know exactly what my life looked like, Evelyn said. 5 years ago it was clear. I knew where I was going, who I was with, what I was building. She was quiet for a moment. I don't know any of that now. I don't know what I'm going to find in the next 3 days. I don't know what the ranch is. It's burned. It's gone. I don't know what Thomas is. She paused. The only things I know for certain right now are this child and you. The words landed quietly, without drama. She hadn't said them to be significant. She'd said them because they were true, and she was a person who said true things. He didn't do anything with it. He just sat beside her on the bench in the thin shade and let it be what it was. Well, he said, after a moment, that's 2 things. She looked at him sideways. Something moved at the corner of her mouth. That's 2 things, she agreed. They stayed in Rylea through the afternoon and the night, in a room above the farriers that Graf offered without charging much for it, because Rylea was a small enough place that news traveled without effort, and Graf had seen what Belle's leg looked like, and had an opinion about the circumstances that had produced it. The room was small and had 1 window and a bed and a cot that had seen better years. Caleb took the cot. He woke twice in the night, once from habit, once from a sound on the road below that turned out to be nothing. The second time he lay awake for a while, listening. Evelyn was awake too. He could tell by her breathing. Can't sleep, he said low. I keep running it, she said. The different ways it could go. Doesn't help, he said. I know it doesn't help, she said. I can't stop anyway. He stared at the ceiling. When I was in the service, before a job I knew was going to be bad, I'd pick one thing. One specific thing I was going to do when it was over. Doesn't matter what. Eat a meal somewhere. Sit on a particular porch. Something ordinary and specific. And I'd hold on to that instead of the running. Silence. What would you pick now, she said. He thought about it. Coffee that doesn't taste like metal, he said. Somewhere with a table and no reason to hurry. She was quiet for a moment. That's a low bar, she said. It was the same thing she'd said before, about the coffee, and it had the quality of a thing that had become theirs without planning to. Most good things are, he said. Another silence. This one was the easier kind. Caleb, she said. Yeah. Thank you for all of it. I know I haven't said it enough. You don't need to say it. I want to, she said. You didn't have to be any of this. You could have ridden past me on that road and none of this would have been your problem. I need you to know that I see that. He was quiet for a moment. I know you see it, he said. That's one of the things about you. She didn't ask what he meant. He thought maybe she knew. They went back to trying to sleep, and this time they both managed it. Belle was closer to 85% in the morning, which was better than Graf had promised. They left Rylea before the heat came on, moving north on the Fairfield Road at a pace that respected the horse without losing ground. Caleb kept them to the right side of the road, close to the tree line where the ground was softer and easier on Belle's leg. And they made good time in the way that only happened when everything that could go wrong was, for the moment, not going wrong. They were 9 miles north of Riley when Evelyn said, "Someone's behind us." He'd already felt it, not seen anything. Felt it, the way you felt a change in the quality of the country behind you when it stopped being empty. He kept his pace and his eyes on the road ahead. "How long?" "Since the last curve," she said. "Maybe longer. I wasn't sure until now." He didn't look back. "One rider or more." "One, I think, moving careful." One rider moving careful was different from a group. One rider could be anything: a traveler, a rancher, someone with legitimate business on the same road. It could also be a scout moving ahead of others. He processed the options and said, "When we come to the fork at Miller Creek, say, 'There's a fork, maybe 2 miles. Miller Creek goes left and the main road stays right. Take the left. Don't hesitate.' And if it's just a traveler," she said, "then we've taken a longer route, and I apologize for the inconvenience." She was quiet for a beat. "What will you do?" "Stay on the main road," he said. "Let whoever it is pass me. See what we're dealing with." "I don't like that." "I know." "What if—" "Evelyn," he said, and his voice was quiet, but it had a quality that stopped the sentence. Not commanding, just the particular steadiness of a man who had made decisions like this before and knew that the way you made them mattered as much as what you decided. "You know the road to Fairfield now. You know the name at the federal office. You've got the package and you've got the gun. You know what to do." A long silence. "I know what to do," she said. Not agreeing exactly. Acknowledging. "Good." 2 miles came in about 20 minutes. The fork at Miller Creek was marked by a boulder and a leaning wooden sign, and when they reached it, Caleb said, "Go," quietly, and Evelyn turned Belle left without looking back. He pulled up and turned his horse. He'd borrowed a plain bay gelding from Graff for the morning, giving Belle an extra rest, and sat in the middle of the road and waited. The rider came around the curve about 90 seconds later. He was young. That was the first thing. Maybe 25, dark-haired, riding a horse that had been ridden hard and not recently rested. He pulled up when he saw Caleb sitting there, which was the reaction of someone who wasn't expecting to be waited for. They looked at each other. The young man's face was drawn, trail-worn, with the look of someone who hadn't slept adequately in several days. He was armed, revolver on his hip, but his hand wasn't near it. He had a split lip, mostly healed, and a bruise along his jaw that was fading yellow-green. His eyes, when they found Caleb's face, had the quality of a man searching for something specific. "You're Mercer," the young man said. Caleb's hand dropped to the revolver. "Who are you?" "My name is Hale," the young man said. "Thomas Hale. I've been looking for my wife for 3 days." The silence on the road lasted about 4 full seconds. Caleb looked at him, at the split lip, the bruise, the horse ridden half into the ground, the eyes that had the specific quality of a man who had been scared for a long time and was somewhere on the other side of it now, not safe, but past the worst point of afraid. He looked at all of it and ran it against what Evelyn had told him and what Porter had said, and what he knew about the road between here and Fairfield. He turned the bay horse around. "Come with me," he said. Thomas Hale didn't argue. He followed. They caught up to Evelyn and Belle at the first bend of the Miller Creek Road, where the trees came down close and the light went green and filtered. Evelyn had stopped, because of course she had. She'd heard the horses and had Belle turn facing the sound when they came around the bend, the revolver in her hand, and she held it there for the half second it took her eyes to move from Caleb to the man behind him. The revolver came down. She stared at Thomas Hale. He stared back at her from the back of his exhausted horse, and whatever he'd been rehearsing to say, and Caleb could tell he'd been rehearsing something, he didn't say it. He just looked at her, at the baby in the wrap against her chest, and something happened in his face that was too private to look at directly. Caleb looked at the trees. "Evelyn," Thomas said. His voice came out rough. She didn't respond immediately. She sat on Belle with one hand on the reins and the other at her side, and the look on her face was not the one Caleb might have expected. Not relief, not warmth, not the open reception of a woman reunited with her husband after fear and distance. It was complicated, thorough, the look of a woman who had been carrying too many versions of this moment for too long and was now having to put most of them down and stand in the actual version. "You're alive," she said. Her voice was steady. "I'm alive," he said. "Are you hurt?" "Some. Not badly." June, as if recognizing something in the voice or the quality of the moment, or perhaps just responding to the change in her mother's body, turned her head in the wrap and looked at Thomas Hale with the deep, serious attention she brought to everything unfamiliar. Thomas looked at June for a long moment. His face did something complicated. "She's bigger," he said quietly. "It's been 2 months," Evelyn said. He flinched at that, just slightly, the flinch of a man who'd earned it. Caleb stayed where he was, behind Thomas, giving the distance the moment required. But he was watching. Watching Thomas, specifically. The hands, the shoulders, the quality of the man under the surface of the reunion. You learned to watch that way in the Marshall years, and you didn't entirely stop. What he saw in Thomas Hale was not the man he'd half expected from Evelyn's description alone, not the diminished, shame-carrying figure who'd gone quiet on his wife. He was that, some of him. But he was also, underneath the road dust and the exhaustion and the fading bruises, something more. A man who had done something that scared him and done it anyway. That counted for something. Not everything, but something. "What happened?" Evelyn said. "Between here and Fairfield." "Garrison's men caught up to me 2 days out from Cutter's Mill," Thomas said. "Took the ledger. I got away, barely, but they had what they came for, and I—" He stopped. "I thought about running. I want to be honest about that. I stood at a crossroads and I thought about just going, finding somewhere distant and starting over, and—" "But you didn't," Evelyn said. "But I didn't," he said. "I turned around. I went back north looking for you because Porter told me you'd left before I could send word, and I didn't—" He looked at June again. "I couldn't." Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. Caleb had the sense of watching a conversation that was mostly happening in the space between two people who had known each other long enough to speak in layers. "They have the ledger," Caleb said. He kept his voice even. "That's a problem, but Porter has the partial copy, and I know people in Fairfield who can work with partial." Thomas looked at Caleb, really looked at him for the first time with the wariness of a man who didn't know yet what to make of the stranger who'd been traveling with his wife. "You were a marshal." "Was," Caleb said. "Evelyn trusts you." "She does," Evelyn said, before Caleb could speak. No elaboration, just the statement, clean and flat, with the finality of something that wasn't open for discussion. Thomas held Caleb's eyes a moment longer, then he nodded. "What do we do?" What they did was move. Staying on the Miller Creek Road North, which eventually rejoined the main Fairfield Road at a point above where Garrison's people would expect them. Thomas rode beside Evelyn for most of it, and Caleb gave them the distance they needed, riding ahead enough to keep an eye on the road and behind enough to hear if something changed. He listened to what he could hear of them, not the words mostly, but the rhythm of it, the stops and starts of a difficult conversation being had on horseback, in pieces, around the inescapable presence of a 7-month-old who occasionally offered commentary in her own register. He heard Evelyn's voice go flat, and then softer, and then flat again. He heard Thomas's voice go low in a way that meant apology, or something near it. He didn't try to hear more than that. Noon came, and they stopped at a creek to water the horses. Thomas took June while Evelyn stretched her back, and the man held his daughter with the careful, slightly uncertain grip of someone who'd been away long enough that the familiar had become unfamiliar, and June examined him with her usual scientific intensity, and then, with the inexplicable judgment of infants, grabbed his finger and held on. Thomas Hale pressed his eyes closed for a second. Caleb looked away and refilled the canteen. "Mercer," Thomas said. He looked up. Thomas had June against his shoulder and was looking at him with the direct look of a man who'd decided to say something rather than continue not saying it. "I know what I put her through, and what I put both of them through." He paused. "I'm not going to say I deserve help from a stranger. I know I don't." "It's not about what you deserve," Caleb said. "It's about getting your family somewhere safe and ending Garrison's ability to come after them. That's the goal." "That's simple." "That's simple." Thomas looked at him for a moment longer. "She said you rode in off the desert and just stayed." "Something like that." "Why?" Caleb thought about how to answer that honestly without saying more than was his to say. "Because it was the right thing to be doing," he said finally, and because I hadn't had a right thing to be doing in a while. Thomas absorbed that. He looked down at June, who was investigating the buttons on his shirt with concentrated interest. "She's the reason I didn't run," he said. Not to Caleb particularly, more to the air, to the fact of the creek and the afternoon. I kept seeing her face. The way she looked at me before I left, like she didn't know I was leaving, like she'd see me at supper. He paused. A man can talk himself into a lot of things, but not that. Caleb didn't say anything. He didn't need to. Evelyn came back from behind the cedar trees where she'd gone for privacy, and Thomas turned and they looked at each other, and she walked to him and took June, and for a moment the three of them were close together, not touching exactly, but arranged like people who shared something that was currently damaged but not destroyed. Caleb gave them that moment and went to check Belle's foreleg. The trouble came at the old Deering Junction, 4 miles south of Fairfield. He saw it first. A wagon stopped crossways on the road, the kind of arrangement that didn't happen by accident. 2 horses tied to the fence at the junction entrance. No one visible, which was worse than someone visible. He held up his hand and they all stopped. "Wagons blocking the road," he said low. Thomas came up beside him and looked. "Garrison. Most likely." Caleb turned in the saddle, looking at the country on both sides. The left was a long open slope, no cover, bad option. The right was denser, scrub cedar coming down from a limestone ridge, possible to move through but slow and loud. "There's a fence cut I know about a half-mile back. Old ranch boundary, Chicas. Takes you through on the east side of the ridge and brings you out above Fairfield, closer to the federal office." "You've been on this road before," Thomas said. "Years ago. Enough to remember." "And you?" Thomas said, and his voice had a careful quality. "I'll go through the junction," Caleb said. Evelyn looked at him sharply. "No." "It's 1 wagon and 2 horses," he said. "Maybe 2 men, maybe 3. I ride up easy, give them something to look at. You take the fence cut." He met her eyes and kept his voice level. "This is what I know how to do, Evelyn." "I know what you know how to do," she said. "That doesn't mean—" "Thomas knows the way to the federal office," Caleb said. He kept his eyes on hers. "You've got the package. You know the name. Harlan Webb." He paused. "You know what to do." The same words as before. She heard them the same way. Not as dismissal, but as the thing underneath. "I trust you with the most important part." Her jaw set hard. "You'd better come into Fairfield," she said. "I intend to," he said. She held his eyes a moment longer, and in that moment something passed between them that neither of them was going to put into words on a road south of Fairfield with 2 horses and a stopped wagon and everything still unresolved. Not the time and not the place, but the thing itself was there, had been there, was not going back to wherever it had come from. "Go," he said. Thomas turned his horse and led them back to the fence cut, and Caleb turned the bay toward the junction and rode. The men at the wagon, 3 of them, it turned out, not 2, were exactly what he'd expected. One of them was the careful man from Porter's office, which meant Garrison had reorganized after Cutter's Mill and pushed north, which meant they'd been moving faster than he'd calculated. The man recognized Caleb at about the same distance Caleb recognized him. They looked at each other across 50 yards of road. "You're ahead of yourself," Caleb said, easy, riding up to within talking distance and stopping. "We're where we need to be," the man said. "Where's the woman?" "Gone another direction," Caleb said. "I came to talk." "Talk?" The man said it flatly. "About what Garrison gains and loses from this point forward," Caleb said. "You've got the ledger. That's already done. But there's a partial copy in federal hands in Fairfield right now, and there's a man in the marshal's office who worked with me for 6 years and who I sent word to this morning. He hadn't sent word, but the man didn't know that, and the story was close enough to the real situation to hold for a while. Garrison can keep running these people down and make everything worse for himself, or he can count the ledger as a win and walk away from a woman and a child who just want to disappear." The man was quiet, looking at him. "Garrison doesn't walk away," the man said. "He will from this," Caleb said, "because the alternative is a federal investigation into everything on those pages, which happens whether the partial copy is in Fairfield now or whether it gets there in the next 48 hours. He kept his voice conversational. "I'm giving you the chance to take a message back. That's all this is." Another silence, longer. "And if we don't want to take a message," the man said. Caleb looked at the three of them. He looked at the road behind them, and the road beside them, and the limestone ridge to the east. And he thought about a fence cut through cedar, and a woman on a borrowed horse with a baby, and a package of documents, and her husband beside her. And he thought about how much time they needed and how much he could buy them. "Well," he said, "then we'll be here a while." The sun was in the wrong position to be useful, which it usually was. The bay horse shifted under him, restless, and he calmed it with his knee. The careful man on the other side of 50 yards of Texas Road looked at him with the particular expression of someone deciding what something is going to cost, running the arithmetic, not yet landed on an answer. Caleb waited. He was good at waiting. The afternoon held everything in place. The three men, the wagon, the limestone ridge to the east, where somewhere on the other side of it the people he was waiting for were moving north. And he sat in it without moving, without hurrying, without any of the things that announced a man's position before he'd decided to announce it. The careful man finally looked at his two companions, said something low. Then he looked back at Caleb and said, "We'll deliver your message." It wasn't the end of it. He knew that. Garrison didn't send men to deliver messages from people he'd never agreed to negotiate with. This was a delay, same as what he'd given them. A mutual delay, two sides buying time, and the side that used the time better was going to have the advantage when the actual reckoning came. But it was enough. He nodded once. "Appreciate it," he said. He turned the bay horse north and rode at a walk, keeping his back straight, not hurrying, listening for the sound of anyone deciding to change their mind behind him. Nothing came. He kept walking the horse until the junction was far enough behind him that the angles no longer worked, and then he touched the horse's sides and moved into a lope. The fence cut came up on the right side of the road, a gap in the old cedar post line, and he went through it into the cedar without slowing, following the faint trace of an old ranch road up through the limestone, pushing branches out of his face, the horse finding its way in the dappled shadow. The ridge came and went. The country opened on the other side into rolling grass, and Fairfield sat in the middle distance, like a promise that was going to have to be checked once he got there. He pushed the horse to a run. He found them on the outskirts of the town, Thomas and Evelyn, Belle and the borrowed horse, June awake in the wrap and looking at the town approaching with her perpetual expression of scientific interest. They had stopped to wait for him, which he'd told Evelyn not to do and had expected her to do anyway. She turned when she heard him coming. The look on her face when she saw him, that single, unguarded second before she arranged herself, was the kind of look that lands in a man and stays there. "Told you I'd come," he said, pulling up beside her. "I didn't doubt you," she said, which wasn't what her face had said 30 seconds ago before she'd had time to arrange it. He didn't point that out. "The federal office is 2 streets in," Thomas said. "On the left past the hardware." Caleb looked at Evelyn. She looked at him. Something passed between them. Acknowledgement, completion, the specific feeling of two people who had moved through something difficult together and arrived at the other side still upright. And then she turned and looked at the town ahead, and he fell into pace beside her, and they rode into Fairfield together as the afternoon began its long decline toward evening. June, for reasons known only to herself, laughed. It was the first time Caleb had heard her laugh. It was a small sound, sudden and complete, and it went off in his chest like something being set right that had been wrong for a long time. He rode forward into the town and didn't try to stop smiling. Harlan Webb had not changed much in 6 years. He was heavier in his middle and had more gray in his beard than Caleb remembered, and he walked with a slight hitch in his left knee that hadn't been there before, but his eyes were the same, sharp, patient, the eyes of a man who had spent 3 decades listening to people tell him things and had learned to hear the parts they didn't say. He stood in the doorway of the federal marshal's office on Crane Street in Fairfield and looked at Caleb Mercer standing on his porch with a woman and a baby and a road-worn stranger, and he said absolutely nothing for a full 3 seconds. Then he said, "You look terrible." "Good to see you too, Harlan," Caleb said. Webb stepped back from the door. "Get inside, all of you." The office was larger than Porter's and tidier, with the particular order of a place where serious work happened, and the people doing it understood the cost of disorganization. A deputy looked up from a desk in the corner, took in the group, and went back to his papers with the trained-in curiosity of someone who had learned not to ask questions until they were invited. Webb led them to a back room with a table and chairs, and closed the door and sat down and looked at them all with the measuring assessment that Caleb remembered from a dozen difficult briefings in a dozen difficult places. "Start from the beginning," Webb said. "Don't leave out the parts you think I won't like." So they did. Caleb took most of it: the desert road, Red Rock, Cutter's Mill, the junction south of town, and Evelyn filled in the parts she'd lived that he hadn't. Thomas spoke when Thomas's portion came, and he spoke plainly, without decoration or excuse, which Caleb noted and respected. He laid out what he'd done for Garrison, what he'd understood about the operation, what was in the ledger he'd taken and subsequently lost, and what was in the partial copy that Evelyn took from her wrap and set on Webb's table. Webb didn't touch the package immediately. He let Thomas finish talking and sat with it for a moment, the way he always had, taking time, not rushing to conclusions. "Garrison," he said finally. "You know the name," Caleb said. "We know the name," Webb said. "We've been building something on Garrison for about 2 years. Freight fraud, land manipulation, a couple of killings we can connect to his organization, but haven't been able to pin directly." He looked at the package. "What's in there?" "Names and transaction records," Caleb said. "Partial. Enough to corroborate what Thomas knows from testimony." "Testimony," Webb said, and looked at Thomas with a specific quality of attention. Thomas met it. "Whatever you need," he said. "I'll testify to everything I know." Webb picked up the package, unwrapped it carefully, read the first page without expression, then the second, then set them down. "This is good," he said, in the understated way of someone who meant it was better than good. He looked at Caleb. "How close are Garrison's people?" 4 miles south, last I saw them. Possibly less by now." Webb stood up. "All right." He moved to the door and opened it. "Riley," he said to the deputy at the front desk, "get Morse and Patterson and tell them I need them in here in 5 minutes." He turned back to the room. "You're going to stay here tonight, all of you. I'm going to put 2 men on the street and I'm going to send word south to the junction." He looked at Thomas. "And you're going to sit down with me in the morning and tell me everything you know from the beginning, every name, every location, every transaction you witnessed. Can you do that?" "Yes," Thomas said. "Good." Webb looked at Caleb one more time. Something in his eyes that wasn't quite sentiment, but was related to it. The look of a man acknowledging a debt without wanting to make a speech about it. "You still can't stay out of trouble," he said. "I wasn't in trouble," Caleb said. "I was in someone else's trouble." Webb almost smiled. "There's a difference?" Caleb thought about Evelyn on the desert road walking into a burning horizon. This time, he said, "Yeah." The night in the federal office was the safest night any of them had spent in longer than they could accurately remember, which meant that the particular kind of exhaustion that only came when a person finally stopped bracing against danger arrived for all of them at more or less the same time. Webb had a back room with cots, the practical provision of a man who ran operations that sometimes required people to stay put, and Evelyn was asleep before she'd been horizontal for 10 minutes, June tucked against her in the unconscious trust of a child who slept where her mother slept, and that was all the security she needed. Thomas sat in the front room for a while, talking quietly with Webb about logistics, about the morning testimony, about what Garrison's likely moves would be now that the situation had changed. Caleb listened for a while and then didn't, sitting in a chair by the window with his eyes on the dark street outside, half watching and half just being still. Webb came and sat beside him after a while. "Tell me, actually," Webb said, low enough that it didn't carry. "I did tell you," Caleb said. "You told me the facts," Webb said. "I've known you a long time. That's not the same as telling me." Caleb looked at the street. A man walked past with a lantern, unhurried, going home from somewhere. "She was walking alone in the desert with a 7-month-old, he said. "I stopped." "And then stayed," Webb said. "And then stayed." Webb was quiet for a moment. "Mara's been gone 2 years. 2 winters, Caleb said. "Are you—" Webb paused, choosing the word. "All right." Well, Caleb thought about that, about the honest answer, which was not a simple thing. "Better than I was," he said. "Which isn't the same as all right." "No," Webb agreed. "It isn't." They sat for a while in the comfortable silence of two men who had known each other long enough that silence was allowed. "She's something," Webb said, not intrusively, just observationally, the way a man with good eyes noted things he'd seen in the course of an evening. "She is," Caleb said. He didn't elaborate. Webb didn't ask him to. The street stayed quiet. Somewhere down toward the livery, a horse stamped, and then that was quiet too. "Get some sleep," Webb said, and stood up, and went back to the desk where Thomas was still talking. Caleb stayed at the window a while longer. Not because he expected anything to come out of the dark, just because the sitting was still a habit, and some habits took longer than others to decide they didn't need to be kept anymore. Garrison's men came at dawn, not the three from the junction, more than that. Webb had put 2 deputies on the street and sent a rider south, but Garrison's organization ran deeper into Fairfield than Webb had anticipated, and the man who came to the front door of the federal office just before sunrise was not someone riding in from the road, but someone who'd been in town already, waiting, and he had 5 men at his back arranged across the street in the thin early light like a problem that was going to require a solution. Caleb was already awake. He heard the knock, if you could call it that, the specific hard, flat sound of a rifle butt on a door being knocked by a man who wanted you to know what kind of message he was sending, and was on his feet before the echo died. Webb came out of the back already dressed, which said everything about how well he'd slept. He looked at Caleb. Caleb looked at the window. They had the same assessment in the same second. "How many?" Webb said. "6 that I can see. There may be more on the far side." Thomas appeared in the hallway. Evelyn was behind him, June in her arms, her face the face he knew, past fear into the practical register operating. "Stay back," Caleb said to her. "Not a question." She nodded. She didn't argue this time, which told him she'd run the numbers herself and arrived at the same place. Webb's 2 deputies were already at the front of the office. The rider he'd sent south had apparently not reached his destination, or had reached it too late, or the men from the junction had moved faster than the message. It happened. It happened more often than it should, and less often than it might have, and the difference was usually in how you handled the next 10 minutes. The man on the porch spoke through the door. His voice was pleasant in the specific way of men who had learned that pleasantness and threat were more effective combined than separately. "Marshal Webb, my employer has no interest in a confrontation with federal officers. He'd like the documents and the witness, and then everyone goes home." "Your employer can come talk to me himself," Webb said. "My employer sent me instead." "Then tell your employer he can speak to my office through the appropriate legal channels," Webb said, in the flat tone of a man who'd had this conversation before and found it tedious. A pause. Then, "That's not going to work for us." Webb looked at Caleb. Caleb looked back. The math was 6-4. Him, Webb, and 2 deputies against 6 visible men with potentially more on the flanks. Thomas was not a fighting option. He was the witness and needed to stay intact. The office was solid construction, which was an advantage, and the street outside was wide, which was not. "There's an alley on the east side," Webb said, low. "Connects to the hardware store on the far end. If 2 of us go out that way, we can come up on their right flank before they expect it." "Or," Caleb said, "I go out the front." Webb looked at him. "Alone," Caleb said. "No gun showing. I walk out, and I talk to them, and I give you time to get positioned." He paused. "I'm not a federal officer. They don't gain anything by shooting me in the main street of a federal town. And the man from Cutter's Mill, the capable one, he's out there somewhere. He and I have an understanding." "What kind of understanding?" Webb said. "The kind where neither of us has actually shot the other yet," Caleb said. "That's worth something." Webb studied him. "If this goes wrong, then we're back to math," Caleb said. "But we're back to it with you better positioned." Webb was quiet for a count of 3. 5 minutes, he said. "If it goes wrong in less than 5 minutes, you're on your own for 30 seconds. 30 seconds is enough, Caleb said. He looked back at Evelyn. She was standing in the hallway with June, and she was looking at him with an expression that had something in it he hadn't seen from her before. Not fear for herself, not the controlled steadiness, but something more direct than either of those. She looked like a woman who had things to say that she was not going to say right now because right now was not the time, And she looked like a woman who needed him to understand that. He understood it. 30 seconds, he said to her. He said it the way he'd said you know what to do on the road south of town. Not minimizing, just steady, just honest. She pressed her lips together, nodded. He turned and opened the front door. The morning was still cool, the sky the pale blue that happened in the 20 minutes between dark and full daylight. The color of things before they became what the day was going to make them. 5 men fanned across the street, and a 6th on the porch to his left, and at the edge of the street, separate from the others, the careful man from Porter's office, and the junction, and every point between. Caleb stepped off the porch and walked to the middle of the street and stopped. "Mr. Mercer," the careful man said. He sounded tired, the honest tiredness of a man who'd been moving for days and would like to be done with the thing he'd been sent to do. "I told you yesterday," Caleb said. "This doesn't end the way your employer wants it to end. The partial copy is already in federal hands. Thomas Hale is going to testify this morning in a federal building with a U.S. Marshal present. There is nothing you can take out of this office that changes that." The careful man was quiet. "Garrison's play was always the ledger," Caleb continued. "He thought the ledger was the vulnerability. He was wrong, and now he's sent 6 men into a federal town before sunrise, which is a different kind of problem than what he started with." He let that land. "You know what happens next if this goes any further. You've been in this work long enough to know." Silence on the street, the pale blue of the sky getting marginally lighter. "There's still a way out of this for everyone," Caleb said. "Not Garrison. Garrison's finished either way, and I think you know that. But the men he employed who were following orders, that's a different conversation. That depends on what happens in the next 5 minutes." The careful man looked at him for a long time, the kind of look that was actually a decision being made, not just a stare. The other 5 men were looking at their employer's emissary, waiting, because he was the one who decided, and they all knew it. Caleb heard faintly the sound of movement on the east side of the building. Webb getting into position. "Your friend, the marshal," the careful man said finally. "He's in the alley on the other side of you right now." "Probably," Caleb said. "So this is a play for time." "Among other things," Caleb said. "But that doesn't make it wrong." The careful man almost laughed. Not quite. He looked at the sky the way a man looked at something neutral when he needed a second to arrive at something honest. "My employer is going to want to know what I did here," he said. "Your employer is going to be answering questions in a federal courthouse inside of 2 months," Caleb said. "I'd be less worried about what he wants to know." Another silence. "Stand down," the careful man said. He said it to the men across the street, not to Caleb. Said it the way a man said something he'd been thinking about for a while and was finally saying because the thinking was done. "We're done here." One of the 5 looked like he wanted to argue. The careful man looked at him once, and the argument didn't happen. They pulled back. Not fast, not panicked, deliberately, the way men moved when they were making a point about doing it on their own terms. They cleared the street and turned their horses and rode south out of Fairfield, and the pale blue morning held them until they were gone. Caleb stood in the street until they were out of sight. Then he let out a breath that he'd been holding in some form for about 4 days. Webb appeared at his elbow from the east alley, rifle in hand. He looked at the empty street. He said. "Don't say I'm lucky," Caleb said. "I was going to say you're reckless," Webb said. "That's fair?" They went back inside. Thomas Hale's testimony took most of the morning and part of the afternoon. Caleb didn't sit in on it. That was Webb's work now, and he trusted Webb to do it right. He sat in the front room and read a 3-week-old newspaper that had nothing useful in it, and Evelyn sat beside him with June on the floor between them, and they existed in the particular quiet of people who have been through something difficult together and arrived at a moment where nothing is immediately required of them, and they are not quite sure what to do with that. June was pulling herself to standing using Caleb's boot as a handhold, which she'd discovered she could do about 40 minutes ago and had been doing continuously since. She would pull herself up, stand for 4 or 5 seconds with the expression of someone who'd just invented something important, and then sit down and do it again. Caleb let her use his boot. He didn't think about it particularly. She was there, and she needed something to pull on, and he was available. "She's been trying to walk for 2 weeks, Evelyn said. "She'll figure it out soon." "She's determined enough," he said. She gets it from somewhere, Evelyn said, neutrally, not pointing it at anyone in particular. He looked at her. She was looking at the door to the back room where Thomas was still talking, and the expression on her face was the complicated one. Not the controlled steadiness, not the careful watchfulness, but the real face that showed up when she wasn't performing anything. It was the face of a woman working through something she hadn't finished working through. "How are you doing?" he said. He asked it simply, without the hedging that questions like that usually came wrapped in. She thought about it, which was her way. "I don't know yet," she said. "He's alive. He came back. He's in there telling the truth, which is, that's not nothing." She paused. "But I'm standing next to something I don't know the shape of yet. What our life is. What it can be. Whether—" She stopped. "Whether you still want it," Caleb said. She looked at him. The directness of it, that he'd said the thing she'd been circling, landed on her face. "Whether I still want it," she said. "Yes." He was quiet. "I don't know the answer," she said. "I want to want it. June deserves a family that's intact. Thomas is—" She worked at the next part. "He's not a bad man who did a bad thing. He's a good man who did a weak thing and then paid for it and then turned around." She paused. "I know the difference. I just don't know what it means for where we go from here." Caleb kept his eyes on the door. "That's something you don't have to know today," he said. "No," she agreed. "Not today." June got herself upright again, stood for 6 seconds this time, before sitting, and looked up at Caleb with the expression of someone expecting acknowledgement. "Good," he told her. That was better. She appeared satisfied with this and reached for his boot again. Thomas came out of the back room in the mid-afternoon looking like a man who'd emptied something heavy and didn't know yet whether he felt better or worse for the emptying. Webb came behind him with the measured expression of someone who'd gotten what he needed and was already thinking about what came next. "We'll move on Garrison within the week," Webb said. "What Thomas provided, combined with the partial copy and the corroborating evidence we already have, it's enough." He looked at Thomas. "You'll need to be available for the formal proceedings. That means staying in Fairfield or somewhere close for the next month, maybe 2. "All right," Thomas said. "I can arrange a place for your family," Webb said. "Safe, comfortable, nothing remarkable about it." He glanced at Evelyn, at June. "You'll be protected until the case is resolved and Garrison's people are no longer a concern." Evelyn nodded. She was looking at Thomas with that working expression. Thomas was looking at her, waiting for something. Not forgiveness, Caleb thought. Not exactly. More like direction. The look of a man who knew he'd given up the right to set the terms of things, and was putting that honestly on the table. "We'll stay," Evelyn said. She said it to Webb, but it was for Thomas. "We'll stay through the proceedings." Something moved in Thomas's face. Relief, and under it something older and heavier that would probably be there for a long time. He nodded. "Thank you," he said, and it was both to Webb and to Evelyn, and it carried more weight in the second direction. Evelyn didn't smile at him yet. That wasn't where they were, but she didn't look away either. Caleb left the next morning. He hadn't planned to announce it. He'd planned to simply go, the way he'd been going from places for 3 years, quietly and without making the leaving into something. But Evelyn found him at the livery before first light, when he was saddling Belle, the foreleg fully wrapped, 90% recovered, ready for easy travel. And she stood in the doorway of the stall with June in her arms and looked at him. "You were going to just leave," she said. "I was going to let you sleep," he said. "That's not the same thing." He kept working with the saddle. She was right, and they both knew it. "Webb has this now," he said. "You've got what you need. Thomas is here. There's nothing left that you're needed for," she said. He looked at her. She was standing straight, chin level, and she had the look that she got when she was going to say something true, regardless of whether it was comfortable. He knew that look well by now. "I'm not going to tell you to stay," she said. "That's not mine to say." She paused. "But I'm going to tell you that the last week has been— you've been—" She stopped, started again. "You made something bearable that wasn't going to be bearable on its own. And I need you to know that I see that I'll carry that." He set down the saddle strap and looked at her properly. June was watching him with her steady dark eyes. She'd stopped doing the boot-pulling trick and was just looking at him, and Caleb thought he was probably reading too much into the expression of a 7-month-old, but it seemed to him like she was paying attention in the particular way she paid attention to things she'd decided mattered. "Evelyn," he said. "Don't say something careful," she said. "Don't say something that's designed to be easy to walk away from." He was quiet for a moment. "All right," he said. "Then I'll say this. I don't know what I'm writing toward. I haven't known for 2 years, but I know that the last week I've been somewhere I felt like a person again, and that's not something I take lightly." He paused. "And I know that you and June are going to be fine, not because everything is fixed, because you're you." She held his eyes for a moment, something in them that was very close to the surface. "Where will you go?" she said. "North, maybe. I have some land still, leased out, but I could get it back." He hadn't thought that out loud before. The thought arrived as he was saying it, which sometimes meant something. "I haven't been back there since Mara." She nodded slowly. "Maybe it's time." "Maybe," he said. "And maybe after the proceedings," she said carefully, "when things have settled. Maybe you'd come back through this part of the country." He looked at her. She held the look without dropping it or decorating it with anything it wasn't. "Maybe I would," he said. June reached out and grabbed a fistful of his jacket, which she'd been doing for days without any particular cause. He put his hand over her small fingers for a second. They were warm. They held on with the conviction that small hands held on with, uncomplicated, simply because holding on was what hands did. He stepped back. She let go. "Take care of yourself," he said to Evelyn. "Take care of yourself," she said back in the same tone, which meant the same amount. He mounted Belle and rode out of the livery and turned north through the quiet early streets of Fairfield, the sky just beginning its change from black to deep blue, the day not yet decided. He didn't look back, not because looking back would have been the wrong thing. It wouldn't have, and he knew it. But because if he looked back, he would see her standing in the livery doorway with June on her hip and the morning coming up behind her, and he would stop, and stopping was not what this moment asked of him. He rode north. The land north of San Antonio was different from what he remembered, and also exactly the same. It took him 12 days to reach it. He didn't rush. He stopped in towns along the way, ate meals at tables instead of over small fires, slept in beds when they were available. He let Belle recover fully, watched her leg clean up and the swelling disappear, and her stride come back to what it had been before. He talked to people. Not much, and nothing significant, but more than he had in 2 years. The habit of silence was still there. He was just less attached to it. The land was dry, but not dead, the way it got in late fall, and the man he'd leased it to, a younger man named Cassidy who'd been careful with it, had kept the fences and maintained the well, and left the small house standing in its particular spot on the rise where you could see for about 8 miles in 3 directions. Caleb stood at the fence line and looked at it for a long while before he went in. The house smelled like a place that had been clean and empty for a long time, which it had been. He opened the windows and let the air move through. He put his things in the room where he'd slept for years, their room, his and Mara's, and sat on the edge of the bed and let the particular quality of the place settle over him. Not comfortable, not uncomfortable, just real. The actual place, not the idea of it he'd been avoiding. He sat there for about an hour, thought about things, not running from them, not collapsing into them, just thinking, the way you thought about things when you decided you were going to live somewhere again, and that meant being in the same place as your history. Then he got up and went to see what state the kitchen was in. It took him 3 weeks to put the place back into order. Not everything at once, a little each day, the way you could do things when you weren't running. He fixed a fence post that had been leaning since before he left. He rehung the barn door that had been hanging wrong since a hard wind 3 winters back. He planted nothing yet. The season was wrong for it. But he turned over the garden plot beside the house where Mara had grown things and thought about what might go there in the spring. The grief was still there. He'd stopped expecting it to leave. It sat with him in the evenings the way it had always sat with him, the specific weight of a person-shaped space that would always be person-shaped, and he let it be there without fighting it. That was what 3 years had taught him, finally, that fighting it was the thing that made it worse. The weight was part of him. It didn't mean he couldn't move. He wrote 1 letter. It took him 2 evenings to write, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he wanted to say it right. He sent it to Harlan Webb's office in Fairfield, addressed to Evelyn Hale, because he didn't have another address. He said that he'd made it back to the land. He said Belle's leg had healed completely. He said he was doing the things that needed doing. He said he hoped the proceedings were going the right way, and that Garrison's people were no longer a problem. He said some other things too. Not elaborate things, just honest ones. The way he'd learned to say things when he stopped trying to say them carefully. He sent the letter north and then went back to the work of the day. Her reply came 6 weeks later. He recognized the handwriting on the envelope before he read his own name. The precise, deliberate letters of a woman who said things the way she meant them and wrote the same way. He stood at the fence line where the mailman had found him working and held the envelope for a long moment before he opened it. The proceedings had concluded. Garrison had been taken into federal custody along with 11 members of his organization, including the careful man from the junction whose name turned out to be Price and who had, in the end, provided testimony of his own in exchange for considerations that Webb had arranged. The ledger's partial copy, combined with Thomas's testimony and a number of things that Webb's office had already assembled over 2 years of investigation, had been more than sufficient. Thomas was working with a man in Fairfield who ran a legitimate freight operation. It was slow, quiet work. It paid enough. He was, the letter said, trying. That was the word she used, and Caleb understood what it carried. Not absolution, not full restoration of what had been, but the day-by-day work of a man trying to be worth what he'd been given back. I don't know what we are yet, she wrote, but we're working on it. He's good with June. That counts for a lot. She said June had taken her first steps 2 weeks ago, had taken 3 steps toward Thomas, and then sat down, and then gotten up and done it again. That she'd been walking steadily for 10 days now, and showed no signs of slowing down. She said she'd thought about what he'd told her, about getting up in the morning and doing the next thing. She said she'd been doing that, and that it turned out to be better advice than she'd expected. She said she'd meant what she said in the livery. At the bottom of the letter, in slightly smaller writing, as if she'd added it after she'd thought she was finished, June still grabs things with both hands and holds on until she decides to let go. She gets it from somewhere. He read that twice. Stood at the fence in the thin winter light and read it twice and then folded the letter and put it in his jacket pocket. He stood there for a while, looking out at the 8 miles of country visible from the rise, the dry grass and the cedar, and the limestone outcrops catching the low December sun. Belle was in the pasture below, moving at a slow, comfortable walk along the fence line, completely at ease, the foreleg perfect, doing what horses did when they'd been given enough room and enough time. He thought about spring, about what the garden could use, about whether the north pasture fence would need work before he put any stock on it, and about what stock he might want to start with. Shite. Not a big operation, not right away, just enough to give the land a purpose again and give himself a reason to be moving through it. He thought about an address he didn't have yet, and a letter he might write, and a distance that was measurable in miles and also in other things that had shorter names but took longer to cross. He thought about a woman who walked into burning horizons without stopping and a baby who held on with both hands until she decided she was ready to let go. The December light was the particular golden kind that happened when the air was cold and clear, the kind that made everything look slightly more true than usual, and he stood in it on his own land and breathed the cold air in and felt not fixed, not whole exactly, not the man he'd been before loss had taken what it took, but present, here, in the actual place where his life was, instead of the space between places. He put his hand on the fence post. The wood was cold under his palm, rough and real. And somewhere in the pasture, Belle made a low sound that meant nothing in particular except that she was there. And below the rise, the land ran out in every direction toward whatever the next season was going to bring. And Caleb Mercer, who had stopped expecting to feel anything again, stood at the edge of his own property in the last good light of the afternoon and found that what he felt was something he'd almost forgotten the shape of. Not happiness, not yet. Not the clean kind, but the rough beginning of it. The kind that didn't come from nothing being wrong, but from deciding to live in the direction of something right. He pushed off the fence post and walked back toward the house. There was work to do. There always was. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough.